Chapter 161, The Blade of Saldia. Chapter text Chapter CXZI, The Blade of Saldia. Taija sat around the table with the hall's Aes Sedai. A few of them were away doing one thing or another, but the fact that she had fully 15 people in the room who could call themselves true Aes Sedai felt well nigh on miraculous. So, any other business? Alexei spoke up. I've had a request from Rand, via Jur, to look into something in Saldia. It seems like they're suddenly becoming a bit hostile. Nothing that anyone can put their finger on, but there may be something going on. I think it's nothing, but given Rand's request, we should probably look into it. Either smooth over some ruffled feathers, or if there's something worse going on, deal with it fast. Fair enough, especially if Rand had made a formal request. Taija thought for a second. Jur wasn't really someone that she'd used to deal with prickly nobles. For all his positive character traits, he wasn't exactly high society. Fair enough, we should probably send a full Aes Sedai, though. Someone who can deal directly with the Saldeans on their own level. Her eyes tracked across the room. Five maybe. Taija was fairly sure she was a noble, but Five was determinedly not meeting her eyes. Then her gaze settled on Benny. She saw Taija looking at her. I suppose I could go. I cannot say that wrangling nobles is my favorite activity. I would rather be here teaching the initiates, but when needs must. Thank you, Benny. Hopefully it will only be a brief excursion. It was probably a good thing that Benny had been left with little in the way of worldly possessions after she fled the White Tower. Of course she could return at any time, but these days she did question what her reception would be like. Anyway, she rather preferred it in the hall. Their library might not be a patch on the White Towers, but it was a novel experience being respected as much as any other Aes Sedai, regardless of her strength in the power. Also, she really did rather enjoy her teas with Taija. She had liked the woman from the first time she met her, but the more time she spent with her, the more she appreciated her depths. Perhaps not the ideal person to be first among servants, but no one could deny that she had stepped up to the role. Anyway, friendship aside, Benny had been working on what she thought would be her seminal work. That Agia who followed Ulthor around might be writing his book on him. Hers would be on the Age of Legends and one physicist, such an odd word in particular. Anyway, before she left for Saldia, there was one more thing for her to do. She opened the door to one of the classrooms. Aviesh, do you mind terribly if I borrow Mandab? I just have a couple of questions for her. The aspirant bowed to her. Of course, Benny, said I. A minute later, she had found a private corner with the troublesome young initiate. Taija seemed to have taken a personal dislike to her because of nothing more than her name, but of course was too nice to do more than avoid the girl. In turn, that had fascinated Benny enough to look into her a bit further. She wove a ward against eavesdropping around them. So, Mandab, you are Saldean, correct? The girl's eyes narrowed, but she nodded. I will be going to Saldia shortly on a mission for the Hall, and I believe I would benefit from some local knowledge. I will be taking a small contingent with me to assist with my efforts. Would you like to come? No, the words sprang out from Mandab. I don't want to go back there. Her commoner speech patterns were certainly an affectation. She was nobly born. It was clear as day to anyone with ears to listen. Very well, no one will force you. Taija would be rather put out if she did force her after all. Still, if you are willing to share, I would like to know your reasons for rejecting the idea so vehemently. Mandab looked down. It's nothing, just a situation I want to avoid. Of course, so it is nothing to do with your real name being Zareen Basher. The girl gasped and looked around her frantically. How did you know? Benny smiled in a grandmotherly way. While it was tempting to pretend knowledge she had not had, this was a teachable moment, and she had committed to Taija's Hall after all. I did not know, my dear, merely suspected, but you just confirmed it for me. You should be more careful. A flat denial or feigned confusion would have been more effective. Now let us talk about why you do not wish to go to Saldia. Elaine sighed, looking between Rianne and Elise as they scowled at each other across the table. This was turning out far more difficult than she had expected. The kin in Ebudar, those that had survived anyway, were generally amenable to at least visiting the hall and seeing what the opportunities were like there. They accepted her as Aes Sedai, and through that Taija and the rest. The kin outside Ebudar, on the other hand, she was getting fed up with being called girl. Light only knew how Taija put up with it. You will speak to Aes Sedai with the respect that she deserves. Rianne barked the words out. It was strange to think about how much her views had changed, although the circumstances around that were less than positive. I will give Elaine all of the respect that she deserves. This was going nowhere. Elaine opened her mouth to intervene when another woman burst into the room. The storeroom. It has been broken into. She gasped out the words before resting her hands on her knees for a second as she caught her breath. 3 of us killed, and the guards. Blood everywhere. What in the light? Elaine stood, mirrored by Rihanna and Elise. Elise spoke first. Let us put this discussion to one side for now. This is more important. Both Elaine and Rianne nodded. She was right. Anyone that was able to kill the kin and guards like that was a serious problem. Olivia had been at the Hall of Servants for a couple of weeks now, and if she was honest with herself, she was getting bored. Everyone was very nice to her. They let her do almost whatever she wanted. They gave her nice food, and she had her own room that was better than anywhere she'd ever slept before. The problem was that there just wasn't much for her to do. Ghislaine was busy with classes, which was understandable, although Olivia still couldn't work out why she'd want to learn to channel. Her own ability had caused her nothing but misery. They also didn't need anyone to do chores for them, and when she tried, they just looked sad and ushered her away. It was very frustrating. She wasn't used to being useless. Dammin were always useful, and while here they insisted that she wasn't Dammin, she did still want to be useful. Roderick had stopped being upset with her after the first week, but when she went to him, she discovered she was actually very bad at baking, so that was out too. Olivia sighed to herself and tried not to look too mopey as she walked through the hall's grounds. Ghislaine had suggested that she join the lessons with her, but that didn't seem right either. She didn't want to be a Merith Dammin, even if they weren't all that bad, and anyway, she already knew how to embrace Sedar. It was easy. It just had too many bad memories to go with it. She stopped to look over a class of aspirants, being led by one of the Aes Sedai. Olivia didn't recognize her. The first aspirant stepped forward, the light of Sedar sprung up around her, and then a weave of fire, air, and spirit formed. Even from a distance, Olivia felt the wash of heat, more ways to kill people. Without trying, she knew she could perfectly replicate that weave now, but she already knew enough of those. She tried not to shudder at the idea. She didn't want to go back to that. Olivia turned away, only to nearly run straight into Nynaeve. "Oh, I'm sorry, Nynaeve." She hesitated, but she tried to be polite. Said I, "There's nothing to apologize for, Olivia, and you can just call me Nynaeve. You're not an initiate or aspirant." Olivia stood awkwardly as Nynaeve looked past her at another aspirant stepping forward and channeling before glancing back at her. "Are you interested in the classes?" Olivia shook her head, suppressing a small burst of irritation. Nynaeve already knew that. It does feel like a waste, though. Nynaeve suddenly glanced over to the side at a pair of initiates who were standing and staring and raised her voice. "No lollygagging. You should be in class, not standing around staring like a flock of sheep." She turned back to Olivia and spoke more gently as the initiates fled. "I wonder, when you were enslaved," Olivia had noticed that the people here really tried to avoid referring to Dammin as Dammin. "You were used to destroy things with the power, yes?" Olivia nodded, not sure where this was going. "Well, perhaps something else would be better for you then. You know all about killing things. Tell me, have you ever learnt how to heal someone?" Elaine looked down at the corpses. They really did not look like others that she had seen. There had been far too many of those, but these were paler, somehow lacking. "They look wrong," Rianne nodded. "Sumiko has examined them. They have been drained of all of their blood." "What would?" Elise trailed off. "I do not know. I have never heard of anything like that." Elaine looked at Rianne, who shook her head too. This was becoming more and more worrying by the second. So how can we make this interesting? Tell sat back and thought for a moment. "It needs to be some kind of competition." Taija huffed, obviously, but I want it to be fun too. Educational, obviously, but fun for the initiates, for us too. "Ha! Are you just thinking about ways of traumatizing them?" "No." Tell gave her a skeptical look. "Definitely not. This is an educational institution." Taija tried to sound like she meant it. "Ha, fine. Something educational. How about competitive missions? We can occasionally provide interruptions whenever is most entertaining." "That could work. So we make them form teams." "Yep, but we need to be careful with that. If one team has all the strongest channelers on it, then they'll have an unfair advantage." "Fair enough. Maybe we should choose the teams. Then we can make them balanced. Although, Taija thought for a second, that does sound like a lot of work. Tell barked a laugh. Can we palm it off on one of the other Aes Sedai? Well, Egwene does seem to be keen to be doing management jobs. The fortress shook from an unseen impact, and Fortuona had to resist the urge to scowl. The High Lord Barium joining the rebellion against her had been the last thing she had needed. With the secrets of traveling, it had been easy enough to defeat the first rebellious High Lord, but it seemed that the knowledge had spread now, and that was making her life more difficult than ever. Deploy the 3rd Regiment to the western flank, given them 20 damning. They will turn the traitors' attention away and allow us time to strike. She gave the orders with more confidence than she felt. Since her forced peace with the Westlands and the destruction of the Imperial Palace, all she had been doing was stamping out rebellions, each one worse than the other. It seemed that the High Blood had sensed weakness and had been unable to resist trying to take advantage. While she was the Empress of Sintian, she would show them the error of their ways. Megan looked up from the letter that Siwan had handed her. So they are having games of some kind. It sounds frivolous, but it being Taija, I am sure there is more to it than that. Siwan nodded. I suspect it is some kind of teaching technique. Perhaps this was how they did things in the Age of Legends. The real question is, should we accept her invitation and submit a team? Yes. What is your inclination? We will be revealing our own capabilities to them. They caught each other's eyes and smirked ever so slightly. Anyone other than an Aes Sedai would have seen nothing. Yes, I thought that might not be the greatest concern. We might learn more from them, though. Indeed. Also, the last battle is coming, regardless of any difficulties between us. Anything that can help us to fight the shadow must take priority. Very well. I agree, we shall send a team. The question is, who will we send? Rand lay back on his hugely oversized bed, Min fast asleep beside him. He couldn't sleep, though. His mind just wouldn't stop whirring away. Hardly surprising, you need to be focusing on what's important. It wasn't real. Every time the voice spoke, it worried him more. It wasn't just the fact that he had a voice in his head. That was bad enough, of course. The real problem was that it was clear what it was. He didn't think it was just madness. Nynaeve had been sure she'd healed the effects of the taint, and the voice just knew things it shouldn't. Things he couldn't know. No, it was clear the voice was Luz Thurin Telemon, and that changed everything. I wish I was not real. All I deserve is death. Taija had been insistent that Rand was his own person, that he shouldn't be defined by prophecy or his status as the Dragon Reborn. He'd clung to that ever since he met her. Clung to it with the desperation of a drowning man. Yet here he was, with the dragon's voice in his head, increasingly coherent, increasingly sane, increasingly worrying. I want to speak to her, you know. Not tell Janin, though, keep him away. He deserves nothing but death, and you are a fool for tolerating his continued existence. She doesn't even like you, she said. Just shut up for once. The voice was starting to make demands. It had no way of enforcing them, but just the fact that it was engaging with him, engaging with their surroundings, terrified him. Chapter 162. Let's play some games. Chapter text chapter CXIV. Let's play some games. Ebu Dara Lane turned away from the corpses, her mind whirling. It was strange. Nothing seemed to have been stolen from the remaining Turangriel in the storeroom. Most of what had been there had already been moved, fortunately, but even the remains seemed undisturbed. What the kin had been thinking leaving such valuable items in an abandoned storeroom somewhere like the Rahad Elaine did not know. Still, it would be sensible to increase the guard on what they had moved out of the room. She would need to contribute some wards of her own to them too. Although it was difficult to ward a place that people needed to access, she would have to think on it. Of course, that was assuming the Turangriel had even been the target. There was the other possibility, one that might not have occurred to her before, everything with the Sintian. It might be that this was simply an attack on the kin or the defenders of the Rahad aimed at sowing terror. It was an obvious place to attack, given the guards and the number of visitors it had had recently. If she were looking to cause trouble, she might have done the same. However, that begged the question, how had it been done? Anyone capable of killing the women and guards there without the alarm being raised must be supremely skilled. One of the Forsaken, perhaps. But then that did not explain the way the blood had been drained from their bodies. Elaine scowled to herself. She would find who had done this, and she would kill them. They had a saying in the Rahad that she had embraced during her time fighting the Tzeentch. If someone took your hand, you took their arm. If a gang killed one of yours, you killed 10 of theirs. It had a pleasing simplicity to it. The hall of servants. Taija looked over the assembled aspirants and initiates with a smile. There were just so many of them now. It was hard to believe how fast the hall was growing. Every day more arrived wanting to train, wanting to serve. After some discussion with Tell, she'd settled on what she was going to be going with for her games. They'd been organized into teams of 5. She'd allowed them some leeway to choose their own teams, but with some oversight from Egwene to stop anything too obviously unbalanced and ensure all teams had both initiates and aspirants. Full Aes Sedai were banned from competing because it just wouldn't be fair. However, Taija had some ideas for fun ways to use them too as part of the wide array of competitions she had planned. A web enhanced her voice. For the first task, you're going to be playing Rescue the Hostage. The Shadow, or more mundane enemies, will sometimes take prisoners. Often those people suffer a fate worse than death, unless they can be rescued in time. Attacking teams will be trying to rescue the prisoner from the horrors they face. For defending teams, you will imagine that you've captured an enemy of the light and need to hold them for interrogation against the Shadow's agents. Taija kept going, explaining the rules to them and how things were going to work. Now that you know what you're doing, your team assignments have been posted on the main notice board. You'll also find a timetable for when you'll be competing. There are so many of you that this might take quite some time. Good luck to all of you, and remember, this is meant to be fun, but it's also serious training. We Aes Sedai will be watching. There was a real purpose to all of it, but it really was going to be fun. Taija stood beside Tell on a wooden tower that had been quickly assembled to give a commanding view of the field, watching the first group of initiates and aspirants getting themselves ready on the top of the hill. She wasn't going to have time to watch every match. That was what delegation was for. But she was certainly not missing the first one, and she got her eye on a few others that she thought would be particularly entertaining because of who's involved. One of the dedicated spear maidens, Melin, had volunteered to be the hostage for the session, although Taija had had to explain to her that she wasn't obliged to obey everything they told her to and could try to escape if she saw the opportunity. The dedicated did have some strange ideas about proper behavior of prisoners. It was a pity her and Alexei seemed to have broken up. Taija had thought she was a nice girl, at least as dedicated went, and good for him, but things didn't always work. Alexei didn't seem too upset about it, and had blushed when Taija had teased him about all the things he must have learnt from her, so all was well that ended well. Still, Taija needed to keep her eye out for someone new for him. He was such a brilliant person, he deserved someone equally great to spend his time with. Perhaps a channeler this time. Not an aspirant or initiate, though, not that Taija was all that worried about abuse of power. They were all adults, but there was still a chain of command. There weren't many full Aes Sedai, a very narrow dating pool. Maybe a wise one, that might work, or a tower Aes Sedai. She smirked at the ridiculous idea of one of those stuck-up women deigning to date a man from the hall. Taija's attention was brought back to the competition when Tell gave her a nudge with his elbow. Stop plotting whatever it is you're thinking about. It's time for them to start. I wasn't plotting. Taija lied before spinning a web to make a thunderous boom, the signal to begin. You absolutely were plotting. You always go slightly cross-eyed with a small smile when you are. SHHH, they're starting. Taija definitely wasn't engaging with that. She most certainly did not go cross-eyed. Immediately the defending team were on alert, staring out from the hill, the light of Sedar springing up around the two women, and then vanishing a couple of seconds later when they realized they hadn't concealed the ability. Taija sighed and made a mental note. What she wouldn't have given for a ballpoint pen and a clipboard. Her eyes were soon drawn to the attacking team. As far as she could tell, they'd split into 2 groups while under the cover of the trees surrounding the hill, and were now making their way slowly through some of the denser undergrowth. Presumably, one group would be flanking the defenders on the hill and the other distracting them. Simple, but effective tactics. She was watching the rustling of the undergrowth from her vantage point, helped by some convenient webs when Tell gave her a nudge and pointed towards another spot. Oh, she hadn't seen that at all. It seemed that the team had actually split into three. They had one of the dedicated initiates among them. Taija would have bet it was him. He was incredibly stealthy, even with the rapidly encroaching winter turning the ground muddy in a way he couldn't be used to. Suddenly light flashed out as one of the attacking groups launched a series of webs at the defenders. Taija noted with approval that they were all safe, nothing that would actually hurt them. They were using standard rules for these kinds of exercises. If someone was touched with the power, they were dead. Taija certainly didn't want injuries from people using dangerous webs. The defenders reacted, and soon they were in a duel with the two groups of attackers, while the odd one out crept ever closer. It didn't take long for two of the attackers to be hit. They were outnumbered by the defenders, and outpowered too. Taija wasn't sure what the dedicated man thought he could do. He might take out one or two of the defenders with a surprise attack, but if she remembered correctly, he hadn't been channeling long enough to have all that much strength, so he'd be quickly overwhelmed when he revealed himself. Another of the attackers was hit, leaving them with one desperately channeling aspirant against the five on the hill and one sneaking initiate. Then something happened. It was sudden, so Taija couldn't see what, but she did see the web holding Melon in place vanish. Dedicated must have cut it. A moment later, she was moving. Oh, that was brilliant of the Dedicated. She grabbed a knife from the belt of one of the defenders, and a moment later had it at the poor aspirant's throat, using him for cover from his comrades. His startled squawk grabbed the attention of one of them, and the Dedicated man hit him with a web of air, a bit too forcefully, Taija noted, as soon as he turned his back. His fall pulled the other's attention, and suddenly the tables had turned. In a matter of seconds, the defenders were all dead. That was pretty good performance by the attackers, actually. Taija nodded at Tell's comment. The defenders got overconfident there and didn't think things through properly. They'll probably say it wasn't fair, you know. Ha! Well, then they'll have to learn. Life isn't fair. I gave them a tougher prisoner since they're stronger than the other team. It's their own fault for not thinking that through. Hopefully they'll learn from it, and they can try to make up for it when the positions are reversed. Now, she just needed to watch the rematch with the positions reversed, and then it would be time for the debrief. Marad and Benny smiled at Lord Xania. Thank you so much for your welcome to the Royal Palace, my dear. I am sure that we shall have a lovely time, and will also be able to make ourselves useful. She gave the middle-aged man a pat on the arm. I do fear that I am tired after the long journey, though, so I believe I shall retire for the night. I do look forward to speaking further, though. She might be here for the hall, but given the concerns about Saldia, she had decided it would do no harm to come in her role as an Aes Sedai of the White Tower. An inverted illusion sat over her, giving her the ageless face, and of course she had never stopped wearing her ring. Why would she? She was Aes Sedai in both the tower and the hall. She represented both the past and the future, and she should not think of it that way. That would be even more deeply provocative to Siwan. She turned to the two initiates accompanying her. Girls, you should retire too. It is late, and there is much to do. Maisel, the aspirant, could look after himself. She watched with satisfaction as both young women bowed. It had taken a little bit of persuasion, but eventually Zareen, or Mandab as she preferred, had agreed to come under a web of illusion. Benny had no doubt that the girl would be useful here. Ebudara Lane was woken up by a banging on her door. Come in. She reluctantly sat up in her bed, rubbing at her eyes to see one of the kin looking somewhere between worried and terrified. Elaine said, there have been more deaths, the same as before. No blood left in the more intact bodies, and others simply ripped apart. Oh, fuck me. Elaine started getting out of bed, grabbing for some more appropriate clothing. Take me there, I need to see this. It was not long before she found herself in one of the buildings that the kin used. It was a charnel house, far worse than she had been led to expect. Body parts littered the rooms, occasional pale, drained but intact corpses remained, but mostly it was just viscera, blood sprayed up the walls and remains scattered at random. She had seen a lot in the Rahad, but this was something more. There were places where the building was damaged too. Some of the women here had tried to fight back with the power, but to no apparent effect. Could it have been one of the Forsaken? Elaine reached down and touched her angriel for reassurance. But that wouldn't explain the bodies that had been drained of blood. One thing was clear. Somebody or something was targeting the kin, and they needed to be stopped. Every woman would need to have another one with her at all times for safety. Not that that would do much against something that could do this, but it might slow things down. They would need to work out how to hunt down the attacker. The average kinswoman might not be a strong combatant, but they had a core of veterans, strong in the power and experienced in battle. And of course they had Elaine. With her Angriel, she could take on one of the Forsaken. Maybe. She did not want to find out, but regardless, if it was one of the Forsaken, she had no intention of giving them a fair fight. The Hall of Servants Taija was more than a little dubious about some of the tower's choices, about which Aes Sedai they sent to take part in her games. Elada might have shown herself to be on the side of the light, but Taija couldn't say that she wanted her around. The woman had caused a huge amount of damage as well as, and to be honest, Taija was more offended by this, making a public announcement calling Taija a dark friend. The world would have been a better place if she'd accidentally killed her back in that library in Keemlin. Still, there was no point in crying over spilt milk. It wasn't like she was in charge of their team, and she was one of the most powerful women in the White Tower. Taija was quite sure they were determined to win, and so would have sent their team. Or at least the strongest team they could without being completely obvious about it. Otherwise, she'd be seeing Siwan, Moiraine, and Cadsuane on there. Although actually she wasn't sure Cadsuane took orders from Siwan, so maybe that wouldn't have been an option anyway. Whatever. It didn't matter. Taija plastered a smile onto her face and went over to the women and their warders. Welcome to the hall. It's a pleasure to see our allies and fellow Aes Sedai coming to take part. Hopefully we can learn a lot from each other and enjoy ourselves doing it. Their leader stepped forward, a dark-haired, blue-eyed woman that Taija didn't recognize. Thank you for your welcome. My name is Adelorna Bastin. She gave Taija a slight nod. And I am leading the White Tower's contribution to your event. Taija sighed internally. Clearly not one of her bigger fans among the Tower Aes Sedai. Oh well, she kept her smile on her face and gave Adelorna a bow, not a very low one. If she were from Taija's time, it would have been quite impolite, but wasn't, and probably just thought Taija was standing on her status as first among servants, without understanding how different that was to being Amyrlin. More fool her. With a mental shake, Taija pulled herself out of that train of thought and greeted the other four Aes Sedai. There was no need for introductions, as she recognized them all. In return, she got more nods, although rather less frosty than Adelorna's. Taija kept her voice level for Elada, not showing any of her dislike. To her mild surprise, Elada actually gave her a shallow curtsy. She really had learnt some humility. It didn't mean Taija had to like her, though. It wasn't long before Taija was watching a match again, with Tell at her side. This time it was the Tower Aes Sedai's first try. Technically, the matchups were meant to be random, but of course that was rubbish. Taija had made sure that teams going up against each other weren't too unbalanced in general. That being said, for the Aes Sedai, she picked a fairly average team. She didn't expect her to win, but it would be interesting to see how close these youths could come against the best the White Tower had to offer. Depending on how well the Aes Sedai did, Taija had some stronger teams to throw at them. Or, if she really wanted to put them in their place, even a backup group of whole Aes Sedai that she'd pretend were going to compete all along and definitely hadn't been brought in just for them. Taija had the Aes Sedai on the attack for the first round, and after a nod from Tell, she spun the web to make the starting boom. Before the sound had even faded, the whole team were spinning earth, raising physical barriers up around themselves, creating some quick and dirty fortifications. Taija saw a slight haze in the air above them that suggested either Sedin or an inverted web of air protecting them too. In seconds, they were covered from any easy attack, impressively fast and focused. The Aes Sedai, on the other hand, were moving almost as fast. Very interesting. These weren't the slow, conservative Tower Aes Sedai that she'd seen before. They immediately split apart, moving fast through the trees that shielded them from the defenders' sight. The defenders were scanning the empty ground between them and the trees, looking for any attempts at sneaking up on them. From Taija's vantage point, she couldn't actually see much of them because of the fortifications they'd put up, but she could imagine they were extremely tense. Her viewpoint did mean it was easy for her to see when a small inverted gateway opened above them, and Adelorna poked her head out and almost immediately withdrew it again. Interesting, they really were learning. although if one had been stupid enough to try that anywhere near Taija in a combat situation, she'd have lost her head when she sliced the gateway. Everything went quiet for a minute or two, and then Taija saw three of the Aes Sedai emerge from the trees, striding towards the hill from different angles, with Sedar glowing brightly around them. Interestingly, the other two either weren't holding Sedar or are concealing their channeling. Taija wasn't actually sure whether they were coordinating or not. They weren't advancing together, and as webs started to flash between them and the defenders, they didn't seem to be trying to cover each other. They were, however, making use of occasional inverted webs and actually trying to dodge rather than just stand in one spot. They had more strength between the three of them than all five of the defenders, and it showed. While both sides were restricted in the webs they could use, the fortifications were being chipped away, and Taija was fairly sure that if they'd been stood in the open, the defenders would already have lost. Suddenly, the defenders changed tactics, all five of them focusing briefly on one Aes Sedai. For a moment, she held them off, and then a web touched her, and she was out. The fortifications had nearly been demolished by the time the defenders refocused their attention, but that was still a point to them. Another of the Aes Sedai revealed herself, coming at the defenders from a different angle, and Taija could see they were flagging. Then one of them spun an inverted gateway, just a small one, but an impressive piece of work nevertheless, and opened it right behind Adelorna. The aspirant reached through and touched her with his hand. That made Taija smirk, classy. She could just imagine him saying, "And you're dead," as he did it. Still, she'd have to point out the risk of simply losing his hand in the debrief. Doing it that way might be good for winding people up, but safety came first. She couldn't grow back a hand with the power, although Nynaeve might be able to reattach it if she got there fast enough. That left three Aes Sedai facing the defenders. Taija was starting to think the Hall's team might actually win when the fifth Aes Sedai made her appearance. Eleda stepped out of an inverted gateway right up against the remaining fortifications. Before the defenders could react, she was lashing out with the power, and in seconds they were all dead. Taija could grudgingly admit Eleda hadn't done badly, but she was overall quite unimpressed by the Aes Sedai. Did they just assume they could easily beat their opponents, or had that really been the best they had to offer? She'd have to see. Next, they'd be fighting the same team with the positions reversed, but Taija would make sure they had a harder target for the next round. A few days after the Aes Sedai's first match, Taija strode through the grounds of the hall, Alexei at her side. "You're completely sure?" It wasn't the first time she'd asked, nor would it be the first time he'd answered. "As sure as I can be. He's been sneaking off to meet people, and when I searched his rooms, there were a lot of notes on things that, well, it would take a bit of an explanation for why he had them." Taija composed her face and nodded politely at Dama, who was ambling through the hall's grounds deep in conversation with a tower Aes Sedai, Samitsu, she thought. Interesting. As soon as they'd passed, her scowl returned. "Fine. You get him out of the classroom, tell him it's something innocent. I'll wait outside and shield him as soon as I see him." It wasn't long before the two of them reached one of the buildings, the hall used for teaching, and Alexei went in. Taija loitered outside, trying to look casual instead of furious, and drew in as much Sedar as she could hold with her angriel. It wasn't long before Alexei emerged, chatting to Jedwin, gesturing about something as he went. The arrogant young aspirant only seemed to be half listening. Before he could react to Taija's presence, she struck, slamming the shield into place and spinning air over the knife at his belt to prevent it from being drawn. Jedwin twitched and spun to face her. "Taija Sedai, what in the name of?" Alexei put his hand on Jedwin's arm, and she was already moving to his other side. "We just want to have a chat, Jedwin, somewhere private. Come along." Before he had time to think or protest, the two of them were hustling him away. Anyone looking might find it a slightly odd sight, but Taija's web was invisible, and Tithe weren't doing anything obvious to him. If it was all a mistake, then hopefully he'd be spared too much embarrassment, but deep down Taija knew it wasn't. Marad and Benny sipped at her cup of sea folk porcelain, enjoying the taste of the tea. Pleasant, but certainly not the best that was on offer in Lady Palantria's pantry. It was not the first worrying sign she had seen here, and she was increasingly sure it would not be the last. The idea that a visiting Aes Sedai would not be served the best tea available should have been ludicrous in any borderland nation. This tea truly is excellent. She glanced back at Zareen. Do make sure you enjoy it, Mandab dear. It is not often that we are treated so, and make sure you listen carefully. I shall be quizzing you later. Benny gave Lady Palantria a tired smile. Now that I am here, I am most excited to be able to spend some time in the Cordamora Palace Library, she sighed theatrically. But of course duty calls too. I am sure there will be many opportunities for us to help. You must tell me, though, who should we be speaking to about these? My initiates and aspirant are most keen to be joining the others to help in whatever way they can. Benny took note of the very slight sniff that Lady Palantria gave. The woman was not brave or stupid enough to openly slight an Aes Sedai. Not yet, anyway. Well, of course, and I am sure we shall be grateful for whatever aid they can give. You should speak to Jartany deals with such matters. Benny could hear the unspoken, such as they are, at the end of sentence. She gave the Chaldean a warm, open, and friendly smile. Her dismissal of the royal steward like that was another worrying sign. This was not Tyr. Well, of course, I shall speak to the good man, but now let us talk of things other than work. I had heard that Queen Tenobia has a new favorite falcon. Ebudar, a couple of days after she had set well nigh on the whole Rahad hunting for strangers, Elaine was sat at her desk, flicking through the reports that had been filtered back to her through the kin. Of course there were strangers all over the Rahad. Asking for people to look for them was likely a fool's errand, but what else could she do? She huffed to herself. It was late. She should really go to bed. Poor Matt had nodded off in one of the chairs, his ashandari propped across his lap. Rubbing her eyes sleepily, Elaine stood and shuffled the papers into the semblance of a pile. No one had ever told her how much reading was involved in dealing with these kinds of things. It really was not like the stories. Papers rearranged. She ambled over to Matt, reaching out to gently rub his head and bring him back to the waking world when the quiet was broken by a piercing scream from downstairs, suddenly cut off with a thump. Matt came awake almost instantly, jerking to his feet, hands gripping the shaft of his ashandari. Sleepiness fled Elaine almost as fast. The Hall of Servants the day after Taija and Alexei had arrested Jed when she was sat with her inner circle. The Aes Sedai that she truly trusted, the ones who she simply didn't believe could be dark friends after everything she'd been through with them. Jedwin was sat in the corner, shielded with webs over his eyes and ears. He wouldn't be able to see or hear anything, and there was no risk of anyone rescuing him there. So, the evidence is strong, but I'm not sure it's conclusive. He has more money than he should have. He had notes on troops' movements, dynamics in the hall, things like that, and he's been going off and meeting people regularly. I bet my life he's spying for someone, and I think he's a dark friend, but I don't think we can prove it. Thoughts? She looked around the room. Alexei shrugged. I'm entirely sure he's a dark friend, but if you want something more than I've found, we'd probably have to catch him in the act. I still think we have enough, though. Nynaeve shook her head at the same time as Tell. He let her speak first. You're trying to bring a better time back. We can't just be treating people as dark friends without complete proof. It's not your way. She was right, damn her. I agree with Nynaeve, but equally we can't just let someone who's probably a dark friend run freely around the hall, not now, not with the last battle coming. Tell grimaced. If we throw him out, he'll probably go straight to the shadow. And of course he knows we're onto him now, so we can't just watch him and feed him false information. Taija looked over at Egwene, the only that hadn't spoken yet. What do you think? I might have an idea, but you won't like it. I don't like any of the ideas I've had so far. Yours can't be much worse. Egwene shrugged as if to say Taija had asked for it. Well, what about the binding rod? Taija opened her mouth to protest, and Egwene barreled on. I know how you feel about it, but we could use it in a limited way. Just think, get someone to swear to tell the truth, interrogate them, then if they're innocent they can unswear the oath straight afterwards. It's unpleasant, but it's the only true guarantee we have, and we'd avoid the negative effects by immediately unswearing. Light, we could make it a private part of the ceremony to be raised to be Aes Sedai or an aspirant, a guarantee that we're dark friend free. She met Taija's eyes defiantly, uncowed by her scowl. I'm not saying it's a good thing to have to do, but we're at war with people who wouldn't hesitate to kill every single one of us if they got the chance. Chapter 163. Sometimes ancient relics should stay buried. Chapter text, chapter CXXV. Sometimes ancient relics should stay buried. Ebu Dara Lane pulled the door open as quietly as she could, rapidly spinning inverted webs around her, and Matt to conceal their footsteps and blur their forms. She was about to step onto the stairs when Matt put his hand on her shoulder and shook his head. After a moment she nodded, and he crept ahead, a shandari held out. It made sense for him to go first. She was no close combat fighter, and bluntly, he could recover from almost any injury while she could not. There was a grim silence from downstairs. There had been several wise women down there along with a number of servants and guards. If only one of them had even had the chance to scream, then Elaine had to wonder what in the light was down there. She winced as a stair creaked under her foot. It felt deafeningly loud in the silence. It was dark, too dark. Someone or something had put the torches out. Elaine hesitated, then spun a ball of light into the air. She had no desire to be stabbed in the dark by someone she could not see. She placed the light ahead, and to the side of her, though, no point in highlighting exactly where she was. As soon as the harsh light illuminated the hall below, she and Matt froze. There was a man standing there, revealed by her light. Bodies surrounded him, simply torn apart, horrified rictuses painted across faces that weren't always joined to the rest of the body. He was slender with a nondescript face, sandy hair, and a faint smile on his lips. Elaine realized with a jolt that he had been staring straight at her when he was first revealed, as if he had known exactly where she was. The incongruity of the scene was only worsened by the blood smeared all across the man's front. Elaine did not hesitate. He might not look like much, but he had almost certainly killed a number of channelers without any trouble. Trying to capture him would be idiocy. He spun fire, air, water, and spirit into a fast, and more importantly, lethal web. At the same time, Matt leapt forward with a shout, bringing the Ashandari down in a slash. Before the first web was truly on its way, Elaine was already spinning more, splitting her flows. She was taking no chances. Then she gargled as the first web simply faded when it touched the man. He moved, blindingly fast. Elaine had watched Ale training, had seen Tell fighting with a sword. This man, if it was even a man, was faster. He seemed to simply flow around Matt's Ashandari, sliding past him so quickly she could barely follow the movement. Every web simply faded as it touched him. Matt stumbled away, clutching a stomach that was rapidly turning red where the man had slashed his hand across it. Elaine had no time to worry about her lover. If she survived, she could help him. She backpedaled up the stairs as the distance closed terrifyingly quickly. Taija had made her, Egwene and Nynaeve, drill again and again for if they needed to kill Cadsuane. This was the same, maybe worse. Cadsuane could not move like that, but it seemed this man could not channel. Elaine ripped a section of banister off the wall with the power and sent it flying at the man like a spear. He sidestepped it almost casually, only to be slammed back down the stairs by the slab of stone she had pulled out of the wall with another web. Somehow he landed on his feet. She was sure she had hit him hard enough that he should have been badly injured, if not dead. The man's faint smile was gone, replaced with a scowl. He finally spoke, bending down briefly and then straightening up. "I will enjoy the taste of your blood." This was no man. Elaine was not wasting her time. She had reached the top of the stairs, and she was not going to leave Matt alone with the creature, so she could retreat no further. However, she could still channel. She frantically spun webs, splitting her flows. First a ward against sound around her, and the creature, then she was ripping and tearing bits from the floor and walls behind it, just outside the ward, lining them up, ready to strike. She was about to unleash everything on it when it moved first. With a blindingly fast motion, its hand whipped out, sending a piece of something straight at her. Elaine barely moved her head fast enough, feeling a streak of pain as something cut straight across her cheek. Then the creature was sprinting towards her. Elaine instantly dismissed the pain. She had had worse. Stone and wood flew at the man. He was fast, her webs were faster. Once again he was flung down the stairs. This time she did not give him time to recover. A length of wood slammed into him. She could have sharpened it. She had not. She wanted to pulverize him. It drove him to the ground, crushing his chest flat with inexorable force before splintering into him. Elaine did not let up. She might not be able to touch him with the power, but as Taija had taught her, that was hardly a significant problem once one knew what was going on. Its chest seemed to be flowing back into position where the wood had been. It was propping himself up on his elbows. Fine. She smashed it down again with stone, lifting the slab and propelling it back down again and again. The idiot creature thought this was a fight. Once she knew its little trick, it was simply an execution. It might be able to heal like Matt could, that and unnatural strength. So what? Cadswain was hard to injure too. She probably could not batter it to death the way she would have Cadswain, but there were other ways. Earth was her weakest element, but she had plenty of strength, especially with her angriel. Elaine was conscious that she would probably be making a beacon of herself to anyone in the Rahad, but she could worry about that later. She drew on her full strength, pulling stone and then earth from the floor, from the very foundations of the building. Hopefully it would hold together after this. All of it she wrapped into a sphere around the creature, using it to pull it off the ground, and then surround it, forcing it into a tight ball. Her webs did not touch the creature, just the material around it. As the earth and stone closed around it, she could see it struggling with that immense strength. However, unnatural strength was nothing compared to Sedai. In seconds she had a tight, and more importantly solid, ball of earth formed around it, held in the air in front of her with the power. She could feel the pressure as it fought to break free. It was nothing. There were no gaps. Given the creature's ability to heal, it was probably too much to hope for that it would suffocate, but so be it. She had other plans. If it could indeed survive without air, it would have plenty of time to contemplate the folly of killing her people. Elaine strode down the stairs, full of dignity now that her enemy was subdued. She ignored the blood trickling down her cheek. The first thing to do was to check on Matt. Judging by the sound of cursing, he was all right, but it could not have been an enjoyable experience for him. By the time she reached him, Matt was already on his feet. His shirt was ruined, but beyond that he seemed uninjured, or at least healed, thank the light. He glanced at the occasionally shivering ball of stone and earth hovering beside her, and then at her grim face. Mother's milk in a cup, Elaine. Has anyone ever told you you're terrifying? She gave him her best regal smile, once or twice. Then the facade cracked. Are you all right, Matt? Did it hurt you? She reached out to him. Matt gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. I'm fine. He's still alive in there. What are we going to do about him? She could see in his eyes that he was upset, but he was strong, holding himself together. They could talk properly later. I have a plan. Why did Matt look worried at that? We will need some more of the kin first, though. I do not think I am strong enough to do it by myself. Ones we can trust. Rianne, perhaps, and 3 or 4 others. Can you find Rianne and get her to bring help? You can tell them I will be in the courtyard of the Six Sisters Street safe house. Matt nodded, picked up his ashandari, and headed off into the dark. Elaine took a minute to carefully check the ground floor rooms for any survivors. Once she was certain there were none, she too headed out into the dark streets of the Rahad, utterly confident that nobody would bother her. It did not take Elaine long to reach the safe house. She made her way through to the courtyard and waited, her sphere of compressed earth hanging beside her. A few minutes later, Matt came hurrying in, followed by Rianne and another 3 wise women. She came to a halt, chest heaving for breath, and eyed up the sphere. Is that? Elaine nodded. Yes, it is still very much alive in there. It was no man, just some kind of creature, shadow spawn, I think. Any human would be dead after what I did to it. This thing is too fast, too strong, heals any injury and dissolves any web that touches it. What are you going to do with it then? Fire. Elaine smiled in an unfriendly way. Among other things. However, I do not think I am strong enough alone. Lend me your strength. Rianne stared in surprise for a second. Of course she would be used to Elaine far surpassing any of them in strength with her angriel. Of course, anything you need. Moments later they were all linked, their strength flowing through Elaine. She paused to think for a moment. This would be difficult given her relative weakness in earth. Then she started to spin. First she dug out the bottom of the courtyard, a mixture of air and earth pulling the ground open and excavating a deep hole. It took a few minutes, but once she was sure it was deep enough, she lowered her sphere down into it. These will likely be the last words you hear, creature. If you are lucky, you will die. If you are unlucky, you will face silence for all eternity. But remember this. My name is Elaine Trackand, and if you come after my people, I will make you suffer. As she spoke, Elaine twisted the webs holding the solid earth around the monster, tightening them, molding them to its body. It was delicate work, holding the covering over it completely solid, and yet close to its body. Yet, with the amount of the power available to her, it was not too challenging. Then Elaine started to fill in the hole with dirt. shoveling it back in voluminous quantities. In no time at all, the earth-enclosed figure of the monster vanished under the mud and rock. Once the pit was almost but not quite full, Elaine drew fully on the circle, reaching out with the power. A web of earth, fire, and spirit extended down into the ground, solidifying it into a large box around the monster, the walls of a prison. They would not be unbreakable, but they would resist any simple attempts at digging. They would also resist heat, to a point. She mentally thanked Taija for insisting she learn some building techniques, despite her lack of talent with earth. You might want to stand back and cover your eyes. Elaine spun fire and earth, but mostly fire. She pushed the web deep into the box she had created, spreading it through the churned soil. Then she fed the full strength of the circle into it. At first there was no visible effect, but as Elaine poured in a huge volume of Sedar, heat started to radiate off the patch of ground. Heat that rapidly rose in intensity until there was a faint red haze over it. Elaine kept on funneling more of the power into her web, although even she had to take a step back. After a few more seconds, she heard a gasp behind her. Is the soil boiling? Indeed, a few more seconds, and everything around the creature will be liquid. I very much doubt it will survive. And if it did, well, it would be rather difficult for it to escape perfectly sealed solid rock. Elaine held the web for a few more minutes to make entirely sure, and then released it, allowing the melting, burning soil inside the box she had created to start to cool. Of course, she was not going to just leave it to cool naturally. Who knew how long that would take? Once again, spinning a web Taija had taught her to strengthen stone, she fed it into the still bubbling pool, pushing it deep into it. She could not feel where the creature was, but she could feel the web spreading through the molten soil around it. Wherever the web went, liquid turned to stone, far stronger than it would ever have been without her intervention. With the amount of Sedar available to her, it did not take long to solidify everything inside the walls she had created. Then it was just a matter of covering it up. Elaine quickly channeled the remaining soil and stone back into place over what was now a large cube of power-solidified stone. Of course it still stood out, but that did not matter now. Rianne, would you mind arranging for this to be repaired so that it looks like nothing ever happened? Of course, Rianne sounded stunned. Elaine, on the other hand, was just tired now, and she really wanted to talk to Matt to make sure he was not too distressed. Thank you. I think I shall retire for the night now. Come, Matt. It has been a trying night for both of us. Marad and Mashiara. No, she would not call herself that. Lanfear took a sip of tea and smiled sweetly at the idiot woman in front of her. The so-called Aes Sedai had bumbled her way into Maradan and installed herself here, despite the frosty welcome from the local nobility. She was accompanied by some initiates from Taija's ridiculous attempt at recreating a dead institution, which was a mild surprise. He had thought that the White Tower was at loggerheads with the Hall, but given everything she supposed it was inevitable they would work together. One undeniable weakness of the shadow compared to the light was its inability to work together efficiently. Trying to get the Chosen to support her own plans was an exercise in futility, the fools. I really am honored to meet a true Aes Sedai, she simpered, disgusted at herself, but needs must. I have always thought it would be so glorious to become Aes Sedai. The fool woman smiled benevolently at her, and Lanfear resisted the urge to crush her to a pulp with the power. She was weak. It would not even be a challenge. Well, sadly, my dear, the world does take us down different paths, but you never know. I am told that the White Tower has lifted its age restrictions for novices. If you wished, I could test you for the ability to channel. Lanfear gave a theatrical shiver. Oh, perhaps another time. There is just so much to do here. I had not realized when my father sent me that I would simply be so busy. Ah, yes, I believe the Queen does truly value your assistance. That was why I was going to ask you a favor. Benny hesitated. There are some truly fascinating works in the Royal Library, but I have found that the wheels of bureaucracy turn slowly, and I am struggling to be allowed access. No, Lanfear gasped. They would not obstruct an Aes Sedai. Surely not. No, of course not. I believe it is just an oversight. However, you have the ear of the Queen and you see her regularly. If you would be willing to just mention it, it would smooth things over ever so much. I do hate to trouble her. She is such a busy woman. Lanfear did not need to think hard. Ingratiating herself with the fool woman would allow her to keep an eye on her, and if she was busy browsing through the dross that filled this age's libraries, then she would have less time to make a nuisance of herself. "Of course, Benny," said I. "It would be my honor to assist you, please. Just let me know if there is anything else I can do." Benny seemed to alternate between bumbling around visiting old friends and reading in the royal library. However, to Lanfear's irritation, she seemed to also have taken a liking for her. After she had used some of her influence with Queen Tenobia to get Benny into the library, Benny had started to regularly invite her for tea. Of course, it had hardly been difficult to influence Tenobia. She had not even had to apply further compulsion to the woman. She had only been using the smallest, subtlest webs, her unmatched dexterity coming into play. Now she was restricting even that to only the greatest of necessity. She doubted any of the channelers here had the skill or ability to detect subtle webs of compulsion, but taking the risk would be foolish given her orders to remain undetected. "It is very brave of you to be here." Benny leant forward and lowered her voice. "The shadow is growing ever stronger, and I believe it is trying to undermine Queen Tenobia and the light right here in this palace." Lanfear gasped. If she had not already been holding Sedar, she would have embraced it. As it was, she was ready to crush Benny like the bug she was. "Surely you do not mean dark friends here. Saldir has always stood with the light." Benny nodded. "I know, my dear, it is a worrying thought, but the shadow is pernicious. Sadly, dark friends do not carry banners or reveal themselves. Given your closeness to the Queen, I had hoped to enlist your aid. A terrible task for any of us to have to undertake, but it is for the light." Lanfear nodded, letting worry show on her face. "Of course, anything. The shadow cannot be allowed to bring Saldir down." This was excellent. It was a pity that the woman seemed to actually be trying to do her job rather than palm it off on Taija's minions. But this would give Lanfear the opportunity to extend her own influence. If she wanted someone gone, then what better way to do it than to frame them and go running to the wise old Aes Sedai for help? "Thank you, my dear. I know that the prospect of fighting the shadow can be a terrible one, but all of us must band together, or else we will be in quite the pickle." That suggested. "So you're asking others for aid too?" Benny blinked, looking surprised for a second. "Well, of course, unity is one of the light's great strengths. Working together is how we will defeat the shadow." She had probably read that in some idiotic book of insipid moral philosophy. Still, that was interesting information and foolish of her to reveal. Lanfear would need to be more careful, assume she was also being watched by the people she was watching. Not that she had been anything but careful. Of course, things were never as difficult as they might seem when she had her strength in the power. While it would no doubt result in punishment for failing in her mission, if things did go wrong, she could simply slaughter her way out of Maradan, and no one would be able to even slow her down. Turning Tenobia against the light might be the goal, but killing her and plunging Saldir into chaos would do as a consolation prize. Perhaps she might even be able to frame the Hall of Servants for it. "I do not understand why you are here, Benny," said I. Queen Tenobia stared down at the grey-haired, ageless-faced woman from her throne. "While you are welcome to peruse the royal library, and the White Towers, I said are always welcome in Saldir as guests, we are perfectly able to manage our affairs without the interference of the White Tower or the Hall of Servants." A few gasps could be heard from the people in the throne room, but mostly her words were simply met with nods. Lanfear allowed herself a moment of satisfaction, one she carefully did not reveal on her face, as she saw Benny's eyes tighten slightly. Her plans were going well. If she did not find the bumbling woman so irritating, Lanfear would have been gratified at the way that Benny seemed to have decided to take her into her confidence. As it was, well, at least she was on the inside track on the efforts to fight the shadow here. "So I believe that Lord Elinen may be a dark friend, but it is hard to believe it of the dear man, given everything he has done for the light." Lanfear did not have to feign surprise. It seemed that Benny had actually found a true friend of the dark. Not a particularly important one, it was true, but nevertheless. It seemed the woman was not completely useless after all. The question was, what to do with that information? She did not need to think for long. "That is beyond shocking, but if you truly believe that, then it must be investigated. What can I do to help? Do you wish me to involve the Queen?" He is a popular man, so it would be dangerous to make an accusation without either cast iron proof or her backing. He was no one of importance to the Shadow. She would happily throw him to the wolves to place herself above suspicion. There was no risk of him being able to reveal her, and she could always have him killed once he had been taken, or do it herself. Equals. You're accusing one of my most loyal lords of being a dark friend, a man who has been a friend of my family since my birth. I hope you have more than adequate proof, Benny, said I. As it stands, my inclination is simply to have you removed from Maradan for the insult you have just presented. Lanfear watched Benny wince at those words, and then the woman started to make her case, more confidently than Lanfear had expected. There was little of the bumbling scholar about her now, just a confident and neatly laid-out case. As Benny started, Lord Alinen shouted an outraged protest, but was silenced by an upheld hand from Tenobia. You will have your chance to speak in your defense later. Benny smoothly continued, until eventually she drew to a halt. Queen Tenobia frowned. I am unconvinced. Lord Alinen, do you have anything to say? The man nodded furiously. I have nothing but respect for the Aes Sedai. Not Benny in particular, it would seem. Lanfear sympathized. However, Benny Sedai is gravely mistaken. Everything that she has said is circumstantial. My record serving Saldir and the Light speaks for itself. There is no real evidence against me because there cannot be. I am not a dark friend. I shall answer each of her accusations in turn. Tenobia cut him off. There is no need for that, Lord Alinen. I believe Benny Sedai is mistaken. Unless she has anything more to say for herself, it may be best for her to return to the White Tower. That was Lanfear's cue. If Benny was sent away, then who knew might be sent to hunt her next? Better the semi-competent devil she knew than a possibly much more dangerous new opponent. My queen, if I may. Tenobia frowned. Of course, speak. I believe that Benny Sedai is correct. I have been conducting my own investigation of Lord Alinen, and while I did not believe that I had enough to come to you by myself, what she has just presented supports everything I have discovered. I also have some additional things of my own to add to it. Of course, Benny had invited Lanfear for tea after Lord Alinen had been dragged away. I am most grateful for your efforts, my dear. I am not sure that the Queen would have believed me alone, whatever I had said, so being able to have you step in that was surely beneficial to our cause. I am sure she would have. Everyone knows the value of an Aes Sedai's words, especially when she speaks of the Shadow. Queen Tenobia is a wise woman. For some reason, Benny had invited the ridiculously named initiate, Blade, to their tea this time. It had taken Lanfear a little while to work out who she really was under the illusion over her. Dangling Zarin Basher here under the nose of the Queen was impressive, presumably to be used as a political advisor. When Lanfear had worked that one out a few weeks ago, her assessment of the Benny's competence had gone up a notch. Of course, but it is still frightening to think about. But we Saldean women are strong as is the Queen. We shall hunt down any of the traitors working with him, and they too will face the executioner's block. Indeed, I shall be taking part in his interrogation later today. Would you like to accompany me, my dear? I would value any insights you can provide. Excellent. She would be able to hear exactly what Lord Alinen revealed and strengthen her position in the center of the Light's efforts to root her out at the time. Of course, I may have ideas for questions to ask him that would not occur to an outsider. No offense intended, Benny Sedai. The woman laughed. Just the truth, my dear. That is why I invited you. Your insight will no doubt be highly valuable. Chapter 164. The Shadow fears nothing more than servants of the light working together. Chapter text chapter CXXVI. The Shadow fears nothing more than servants of the light working together. Alexei nodded to the guards on the gate to the White Tower. They glanced at the Aes Sedai patch on his chest, and then studiously ignored him. He shrugged to himself. It wasn't like he cared anyway. Once he reached the tower proper, he was greeted by an accepted who seemed to have been assigned the job of organizing visitors that day. She too glanced at his badge, her eyes widening, and then dropped into a curtsy. Ah, can I help you, Aes Sedai? That was good. She didn't seem at all fazed by the fact that he was a man. The world really was changing. Perhaps he should see if he could drop in on Paddle once his business was done. Alexei wasn't quite sure where he stood with the man. He really was a fanatic for the White Tower, but cultivating better relations with the leader of their men couldn't hurt, and he might get some useful intelligence out of it. He smiled at the accepted. Yes, please could you inform Megan Sedai that Alexei Durkarol is here to see her? If you could let her know that there's a certain urgency to it, I'd appreciate it. The girl dropped another curtsy. Of course, Alexei Sedai. Please, take a seat. Someone will come with refreshments shortly. She hurried off to speak to a servant as Alexei went and sat down, crossing his legs and leaning back to survey the waiting area. He had never released Sedin since getting there. While relations with the White Tower were far better now, he had no desire to find out the hard way that something had gone wrong there. With some time to burn, he decided to emulate Taija and practice his dexterity. After a moment's thought, he started to spin inverted webs, carefully forming them into as fine shapes as he could. It took half an hour before someone came down to fetch Alexei. Not bad, he supposed, given he had just turned up and asked to see the second most important woman in the White Tower. Still, he had been enjoying a bit of peace and quiet while he sipped on fresh juice and watched the comings and goings of supplicants to the White Tower in between spinning shapes in the air. The Narvis, a boy this time, bowed low. Alexei, said I, if you would come with me, Megan said I will see you now. Thank you. He stood in a smooth movement. Shall we? The Narvis led him up various ramps and stairs into the tower proper, while Alexei tried to make small talk with him. Unfortunately, the boy seemed far too nervous to engage. They passed a few Aes Sedai as they went, along with a lot of novices, and accepted. It seemed the White Tower was having some success with recruitment, although mostly women. Far less than the Hall, though, and they all still looked rather young. Then Alexei did a double take as a familiar face came round a corner, deep in conversation with an Aes Sedai. Damer! The older man jumped. Oh, Alexei, I didn't expect to see you here. Something official, Alexei nodded. Something like that. You. Ah, the man actually blushed. He must have been over 50. It looked ridiculous. I was just here to discuss healing with Samitsu here. She has an incredible depth of knowledge, you know. Pleased to meet you. Alexei gave the Aes Sedai a polite bow. Alexei Durkarol. Samitsu Tamagawa, she nodded to him. Damer has said much about you. All good, I hope. Alexei glanced at the novice, who seemed to be getting more and more worried at the delay, and continued without waiting for an answer. Well, I'd better be off. Nice to meet you, Samitsu. Damer, we can catch up back at the hall. It made sense that Damer was here talking to this Samitsu. If she was a talented healer, the man was as talented as Nynaeve, and almost as obsessed. If not for the age difference and Nynaeve's marriage to Lan, he'd have expected them to end up together just so they could talk about healing every second of the night, as well as every second of the day. However, this Samitsu, it seemed unlikely. A Tower Aes Sedai particularly. But then there had been that little blush, and something about the way Damer had had a small smile when he'd looked at her. Alexei smirked. Taija was going to absolutely love this when he told her about it. Heading back down from Megan's office after their conversation, Alexei was pleased with how things had gone. It had been a productive meeting. As soon as he'd explained that the Hall wanted the Oath Rod because they thought they'd caught a dark friend and needed to test him, Megan had promised to send it the next day. Of course, such a valuable item wouldn't be entrusted to a single Aes Sedai. She'd want to send it with a proper escort and formality. It made sense, really. The delay was a little annoying, but he couldn't complain. A single day was fast by the standards of the White Tower's bureaucracy, so he felt fairly relaxed as he headed out. As another novice, a girl this time, led him back down from the tower, Alexei actually felt rather more relaxed than usual. That was until an Aes Sedai came gliding by. The novice curtsied, but then rather than continuing on her way, the Aes Sedai stopped, looking him over with undisguised interest. You are Alexei Durkarol, he nodded, resisting the irritation that bubbled up in him at her tone. That's right, and you are. Alusha Gamies, she glanced at the novice. You may go, child. I shall escort Alexei Sedai from here. With a squeaked, yes, Aes Sedai, the novice curtsied, and then fled. Come. She turned back towards the way she had come from, leaving Alexei to either stand awkwardly or hurry after the slim woman. After a moment he caught up, looking her over, his eyes inevitably drawn to her red shawl, partly hidden under sleek, straight black hair that hung loose over it. So, if I dare ask, what has earned me the honor of an escort from an Aes Sedai of the Red Adger? I thought most of your sisters were less than keen on men, particularly those of us that can channel. A bit blunt, perhaps, but he didn't have all that much patience for Aes Sedai mysteriousness. You will find that you should be more careful of your words, young man. Before Alexei could reply, she flushed ever so slightly and changed her tone as her coppery skin darkened. My apologies, Alexei said. Sometimes old habits die hard. I had wished to speak with you about the control of rogue channelers and dark friends in particular. I see, but why me? Are you not in charge of such things at the hall? Alexei supposed he was, but then he was surprised that she knew that. It was hardly something they advertised. Some of his surprise must have shown on his face, because she sounded a little smug. You might be surprised at what the White Tower knows. Well, that was enough reason in itself to be conducting additional investigations. He had no doubt that the White Tower had its spies in the hall, but having it rubbed in his face like this was simply unacceptable. And you might be surprised at what the White Tower does not know. He kept his reply smooth, his tone neutral. Alusha blinked. She had a small, slightly stumpy nose. It would have been cute on anyone other than a tower Aes Sedai. I doubt it. That has been rubbed in our faces quite thoroughly. Surprise stilled Alexei's tongue for a few seconds. There were a number of tower Aes Sedai who were able to behave tolerably. Behave like civilized adults, as Taija would put it, but he had yet to meet one who switched so suddenly from rude to polite and back to rude. They walked in silence for a little longer until he decided to press her on the obvious question. Alusha, why are you speaking to me? I can't really believe that you're just doing it to needle me. Oh, is it not obvious? It was certainly not obvious, and he wasn't having any of that mysterious tower Aes Sedai rubbish. No, and you know very well it wasn't. She looked a little disappointed. This really wasn't how he imagined Red Adger Aes Sedai to be. Fine, fine. I will be honest with you. Of course, I could be nothing else. My oaths would prevent it. Alexei gave her his most skeptical look to be met with a bland smile. The Red Adger is at a crossroads. We joined it to hunt down men like you. That is no longer necessary, obviously. Well, I'm glad you can at least admit that. She laughed, an honest and open sound. I really am doing this badly. You know, it is very difficult for some of us to adjust to the new world. Anyway, the humor vanished from her tone as quickly as it had come. Please, do me the courtesy of listening, and then you can deploy all of the sarcasm that you wish. Of course, Alexei gestured vaguely, more and more bemused by this conversation. Please continue. Thank you. At least she managed to sound like she meant that. The Red Adger has lost its purpose with the cleansing of the taint. Obviously, that is a good thing for the world, but without a purpose, what even is an Adger? Many of us are also gone, dead, or worse. What was done in the White Tower, she shivered. There were almost no survivors. A few of us managed to escape the tower when we saw what was coming, but too few, fewer than 5. Of course, a number of the Red Adger were outside the tower at the time too, but a disturbing number of them have turned out to be blacks. All in all, there are fewer than 40 members of the Red Adger left in the world, where before we were the largest Adger with over 200. Well, that was an interesting bit of information at least. She paused and took a breath. We have also been left with no leadership. Every single one of the more senior members of the Adger has been killed, turned, or was Black Adger. Except Aleda, and even the most fanatical amongst us has no desire to see her in a position of leadership once more. Sue. She elongated the O dramatically. She really was not what he had expected. The Red Adger is faced with a dilemma. Many outside the Reds are speaking of disbanding it and having its sisters choose a new Adger. Even some of us Reds are starting to consider that as a solution. Alexei resisted the urge to say it sounded like a fine idea even as she kept talking. I disagree, though. Of course she did. The Red Adger's actions were a necessity prior to the cleansing of the taint. A horrible necessity, but nonetheless the best solution to an impossible problem. I do not wish to see it fade out of existence, and that means that it needs a new purpose. The obvious one to me seems to be policing channelers. I do not mean acting to enforce the White Tower's will, but rather protecting the world from the abuses of unscrupulous channelers, wherever they come from. Now, I am no fool. I know that attempting to take on such a mantle without the involvement, or at least tolerance, of the whole is a fool's errand. So that is why I am here, speaking to you, the closest thing that the hall has to a captain of the watch. She took a deep breath as she finished, the words having just spilled out of her. Alexei raised his eyebrows. And you're coming to me with a plan and the authority of at least the Red Adger behind you." She smiled, almost proudly. "Oh no, this is entirely my idea. I thought I would speak to you first, and then think about how to deal with them if you were amenable." Alexei barked a surprised laugh as Alusha came to a halt, looking up with brown eyes to meet his own. What was the harm in humoring her, and who knew, perhaps something good might come of it? Taija was keen on anything that might avoid conflict with the White Tower after all. "Fine, let's talk. No promises, but I'm willing to hear you out. Do you have somewhere convenient?" Alusha's smile turned into a grin, and she gestured at the door they'd stopped outside. Alexei felt goosebumps across his body, and the door swung open. "Would my room suffice? Please, come in and take a chair." Lanfear lifted another spoonful of stew to her mouth. The food in Maradin was no more than adequate. Really, it was a sad reflection on this time, when dinner at the ruler of Saldea's table was only adequate. She missed the restaurants of Paran Disen. They knew how to look after a customer. Exquisite service and the flavors. Oh, the flavors. She would sell her soul a second time over just to be able to go and eat in Chevri de Laru one more time. Queen Tenobia was deep in conversation with Davram Basha, nothing for Lanfear to do there. She allowed her eyes to rove across the room. Thanks to her efforts, Benny and her ridiculously named protégé had been allowed to join the dinner, although far down the table, with the minor nobility. Just as it should be, ensuring that Benny's lack of favor with the Queen was clear, while appearing to help her, and so securing her own position on the inside of the Dark Friend hunt. Lanfear reached out for her goblet and took a sip of wine. It was nothing compared to what she had been used to back in the day. She pretended to listen to the mindless prattling of the man beside her, Lord Haflin. A fairly high-ranking servant of the great lord, in fact, but he had no idea that she knew, or who she was in fact. Lanfear nodded along to Lord Haflin's ramblings about falling grain yields and placed another spoonful of stew in her mouth. She chewed and then swallowed with some difficulty, hardly surprising with the barely edible slop she was forced to eat. She coughed as delicately as she could and then ate another spoonful. This time when she swallowed, she found nothing would go down. "What?" She coughed again, harder. Her throat just felt more constricted. Again she coughed, her whole body shaking with the convulsion. It wasn't working. She tried to breath in to cough again, gasping for breath, only to find she couldn't force air past the obstruction in her throat. She was choking. Lanfear sprang to her feet, chest heaving, panic suddenly shooting through her. She could not die, not now, not like this. Choking to death on a bit of poorly cooked stew. She bent double, trying to gasp, trying to cough, to dislodge the obstacle in her throat, but there was no air to come. The analytical part of her mind noted she was nearly out of time, no more than a minute at best before she was incapacitated. She needed to get help. She needed to get out of there. With a frantic gesture, she gripped Lord Haflin's arm, pointing desperately at her throat as she desperately tried to breath. The world was graying around the edges of her vision. The idiot man panicked, gasping and shouting something she barely heard, but more importantly, not acting to help her. Did no one here know the Strongheim maneuver? She could feel she was close to passing out. She reached for Sedar if she could travel, somewhere. One of the chosen. Could she take the risk? Could she not take the risk? She was not going to die here. "Out the way. I can help her." That was Benny's voice, more authoritative than she had ever heard of it. Lanfear sank to trembling hands and knees, barely clinging to consciousness. She had never thought she would be so glad to hear the dumpy, idiot woman's voice. With fading vision, Lanfear looked up at Benny, reaching up with a pleading hand. She saw the light of Sedar appear around Benny, pathetically weak, but perhaps it would be enough. Then a web sprang forth from Benny, directed towards her, crude battlefield healing, lacking in any real power, but enough maybe, just maybe. As the web sank into her, Lanfear felt brief, momentary relief from the pain. Maybe she would not kill Benny after all, a reward for saving her life. Then she realized, despite the relief, she still could not breath. Saw Benny's horrified face above her as she collapsed onto her back, the last of her strength leaving her. As her vision faded to darkness, she wondered whether she would get another chance. Somehow, she suspected not. Still, at least she could die knowing the idiot Aes Sedai had never had the slightest inkling who she was. Manda watched in horror as Benny shook her head sadly and reached down to close Lady Anella's eyes. The whole room seemed to be struck dumb. Her aunt had stood, clearly meaning to give some command, but now she was just staring. She is dead. Benny's words were like tombstones. Even through the tower Aes Sedai composure, Mandab could hear the pain in Benny's voice. There was nothing I could do for her. She choked. Aunt Tenobia finally found her voice. Even in the harsher world of the borderlands, a death at dinner was a shocking event. Benny suddenly looked grimmer. No, she was poisoned. If she had merely been choking, I would have been able to help her. The hand of the shadow goes further than I had thought, Your Majesty. Gasps rose up around the room, and Tenobia's face turned stormy. Then whoever did this, we will find them, and we will make them pay. No one kills my loyal followers, my friends in my own palace. No one. Later, when they had returned to Benny's rooms, Mandab, she was not going to change her name, despite some gentle suggestions from Benny, tentatively reached out and put a hand on the older Aes Sedai's shoulder. I am sorry. I know that you liked her. She had seen death before. It was difficult not to have, living in the borderlands, but it had still been horrifying seeing the way Lady Anella had died. Benny slowly shook her head, sadness filling her eyes. She was young, and with such potential, it is one thing you will learn as you age, my dear. Sometimes even the best of us are taken too early. It does not help that she reminded me of a dear friend of mine. Mandab supposed she meant Taija. There was a vague resemblance there. Benny sighed deeply and then stood, almost seeming to shake the lethargy off herself as she did so. Still, this is no time for mourning. Our efforts against the shadow have been left in something of a pickle by this. Clearly someone has targeted Lady Anella because of the assistance she's been giving us, and I am fairly sure that I know who it might have been. I am going to speak to a few people, and then we shall see. You young lady, on the other hand, are going to go to bed and remain there. Tonight is no night for someone of your age to be out and about. I shall be setting a ward to ensure you stay there too. She ignored Mandab's immediate protest, already hustling her towards her rooms. Queen Tenobia was still extremely shaken by the events of the night before. Lady Anella had become one of her dearest friends, despite their relatively short acquaintance, and now she was dead. Beyond her sadness, she also regretted the loss of Anella's wise counsel. She had not wanted to see the Aes Sedai today, or any other day really, but since Benny had sent word that she thought she had identified the killer, Tenobia had been unable to deny her an audience. It was Lord Haflin. Benny nodded decisively. The normally vague-seeming Aes Sedai must have been deeply thrown by the events. Tenobia had never seen her looking so angry, and thinking about it, Benny and Anella had also been friendly with each other. You are sure of this? Do you have proof? Search his rooms, you will find proof. I am entirely sure of his guilt. In her angry grief, that was more than enough for Tenobia, and within minutes she had sent a large contingent of guards to Lord Haflin's rooms, ordering Benny to stay while they searched them. It was a tedious hour of waiting, dealing with other matters while Benny read a book she had pulled out of some secret pocket in her dress. But eventually the guards returned, dragging a protesting Lord Haflin with them. Tenobia's heart sunk at the sight. He was a friend of the crown and close to Davram, but if the search had not found something, the guards would have been a great deal more gentle. The captain leading the squad stepped forward and bowed. My queen, we searched Lord Haflin's rooms and we found, he gestured, and an armored guard came forward holding out a jar with a fine grey powder in it. The captain took it from him and handed it up the queen. This was concealed in a hidden compartment of Lord Haflin's desk. Lord Haflin goggled. That is not mine. I have never seen it before in my life. Tenobia ignored him and nodded to the captain. He had clearly done a good, thorough job searching the man's quarters. Do you know what it is? The captain shook his head. It seemed sufficiently suspicious that I wished to bring it to you, but I am no expert in such things. Perhaps I can be of assistance. Benny spoke up, and after a moment Tenobia nodded. The eyes said I might well have some idea of what it was. Benny bustled over and took the jar from the captain's hands, turning it over and examining it closely. I think, yes. She unscrewed the lid and took a tentative sniff. Yes, odorless. I shall also check with the one power. She stared intently at the open jar for a few seconds and then replaced the lid. Yes, it is as I had suspected. Darvan powder. It is odorless, tasteless, and dissolves instantly in liquid. When ingested, it causes the throat to constrict and the lungs to fail. Death is inevitable. She shook her head, disgust painted across her face. A deeply unpleasant way to die. A sick feeling spread through Tenobia's stomach at those words, quickly replaced by rage at a man she had thought was a loyal follower of hers. Take Haflin away. He will be tried tomorrow, and no doubt face the gallows shortly afterwards. I want all of his holdings searched with a fine-toothed comb, and his family, friends, acquaintances, servants, everyone, investigated. Thoroughly. It was the least she could do for poor Enella. Chapter 165. Taking out the trash. Chapter text chapter CXXV. Taking out the trash, Alexei returned to the hall a bit later than Taija had expected. She'd even started getting a little worried. So when she heard he was back, she made sure to go and grab him. Taija found him sat in the dining hall with a mug of beer, staring contemplatively into it. She couldn't say she was a fan of the beer in this time. It all tasted flat, but that was by the by. Taija went and pulled up a seat beside him, spinning a ward against eavesdropping around them at the same time. What's up? At least he'd gotten used to some of her time's idioms. Alexei looked up and smiled vaguely. Oh, just a few things I need to think about. Nothing you need to worry about. Well, that wasn't at all worrying. Taija gave him a searching look. Are you sure? Nothing I can help with? No, just things for me. I think it'll be something we need to talk about sooner or later, but for now I want to think things through. He shrugged. All right, no worries, whenever you're ready. If there was anyone in the hall whose judgment Taija trusted, it was his. Did you get the oath rod, though? He blinked like he'd forgotten about the main reason for him being there. Oh, yes, of course. I'd have said if I hadn't. They're bringing it tomorrow. Great. Taija gave him a suspicious look. You haven't got a girlfriend, have you? Alexei's eyes widened, and then he was shaking his head. Oh no, of course not. It's just business. He hesitated, but I did see something you might like to hear about. So Dama was there. No. Taija leant forward, a grin spreading across her face. Oh yes, I bumped into him, and he was practically arm in arm with this Aes Sedai named Samitsu. Rand stood up from his chair and headed for the door, his escort of maidens falling in around him. With the eastern and central nations united behind him, it was time to move towards the west. He had one place in mind in particular. Gildan had turned into a festering and chaotic sore on the face of the continent with loyalists, dragonsworn and white cloaks, all fighting for dominance. Nominally, Queen Eleander ruled there, but in practice, she was somewhat subservient to Mesma. Ridiculous, the whole concept of a prophet. The man cannot channel, and I doubt he has any talent for predicting the future. Rand dismissed Luz Thurin's voice. Angry mutterings about superstition and backwards barbarians were normal whenever his mind went to the Dragonsworn. As long as the nations already allied to him stayed loyal, then things were falling into place. He knew it wouldn't be long now. He didn't know how he knew, just a feeling in his gut, but Tarmangedon was coming. And then you'll die. You've read the prophecies. Something for both of us to look forward to. What was it Taija had called the man? A bit of a prick. He could see why. Still, he allowed himself a small smile at the sudden switch from disparaging the prophet. You know perfectly well why I am differentiating between your prophet and actual prophecies. As for Taija Kosola's opinion of me, I do not accept judgment from a woman who is sleeping with one of the Forsaken. Outrage shot through Rand, and a servant recoiled from his facial expression before he quickly smoothed it out. Luz Thurin didn't normally respond directly to his own thoughts, instead just commenting on events and actions, because they are so rarely worth engaging with. Boy, this is my fate, stuck in the head of a medieval peasant with delusions of grandeur. Taija had done more for him than any other person alive. His own feelings about Tel aside. He rapidly suppressed that thought and pushed his mind down a different path. Luz Thurin could hardly judge the woman who had been forced to clean up the mess he'd made of the world. The voice fled, with a fading sound of sobs. At least he'd have some peace for a while now. Going down that train of thought normally worked, although he always felt a bit bad when he did that to Luz Thurin. As if he owed a voice in his head anything. Taija looed at Jedwin with contempt as he shook his head again, refusing to even look at the binding rod in her hand, his eyes flicking from her to Alexei to Nynaeve. The tower Aes Sedai that brought it were off being treated to drinks and food. This was internal hall business, nothing for them to worry about. It was also an opportunity for Verin to quietly and discreetly and swear the oaths later before Taija handed the rod back. If you won't swear on it, then you condemn yourself as a dark friend. Taija had no sympathy at all. She already had evidence he was a spy and a dark friend, even if it wasn't enough to convict him of the latter by itself. She'd explained he could unswear again as soon as he'd confirmed he wasn't a Darkriend. His refusal, added to the evidence Alexei had, was enough to condemn him as far as she was concerned, and she'd no doubt that a court of 3 Aes Sedai would agree. He shook his head again. I'm innocent, and I will not subject myself to this kind of treatment. He sounded as arrogant as he ever did, although the fear in his voice was clear. Taija shrugged. Fine. By your own actions you condemn yourself. You'll be tried and then most likely severed and executed. That's the fate of dark friends. Of course, if it turned out you had been working for the shadow, but now wished to cooperate and help the light, I would ensure that your life was spared and you weren't severed. Your choice. Taija waggled the binding rod in front of him. Last chance, Jedwin. Otherwise you'll be on trial tomorrow morning. He glanced up at her face and saw utter certainty in her eyes. There was a long moment of silence that stretched until she stood and turned towards the door. All right, fine, I'll swear, but you'll protect me. The words came out in a rush. Taija nodded. Absolutely. That seemed to be enough for him, and he reached out and grasped the rod with only a moment more's hesitation. At Taija's gesture, he spoke the words that she'd asked him to. I swear to speak only the truth and to answer any questions honestly and to the fullest of my ability. Excellent. Taija put the binding rod away as she started to question him, Alexei and Nynaeve as her witnesses. Are you a dark friend? No. He tried to stop speaking and choked slightly. I was a dark friend. I ceased to be one when I agreed to swear the oath. Taija nodded to herself, as expected. Who else do you know of that is also a dark friend, and who do you suspect might be? Jedwin started to name names, and Taija's lips turned down. She'd hoped there would be no others, even if that might have been more than a bit optimistic. Still, on the plus side, it seemed that at least some of them had very poor information security. Had they been having cozy little dark friend socials right under her nose? The idea was infuriating, disgusting. Still, some people were about to have a very bad day. As for Jedwin, well, once she'd wrung him clean of all information, he'd die with the rest of them. A promise made to a dark friend like that was meaningless. If someone came to her and said they wanted to repent, like Tell or Tame, then that was different. If she had to force them into it under threat of death, they'd betray the light as soon as they got the opportunity, and regardless, they deserved nothing. A few hours later, there were another 4 potential dark friends discreetly secured. To Taija's disgust, one of them was a full Aes Sedai too. She was going to need to move fast now, though. Not only would the White Tower want their binding rod back, there was only so long that she could keep on removing people discreetly for secret missions before any other dark friends that knew them got suspicious. The first she spoke to was Torval, another arrogant young man. Like Tame, he had a bit of a sneer about him. At least it wasn't someone she'd liked. So Torval, do you know why I want to speak to you? He did a good job of looking both confused and contemptuous at the same time. No wonder he was only an aspirant despite his strength and experience. No, Taija said I do not. Something about a secret mission. Taija smiled, a predator's smile. Not quite. Tell me, is there anything you would like to confess now? I've been given some disturbing information about you and your activities, and if you were to cooperate, well, it would certainly impact on the way I see that. He blinked, looking confused. No, Taija said my conscience is clean. I suppose I did steal some pastries from the kitchens a few days ago. Is that what you had in mind? Taija shook her head. Not quite, although thank you for letting me know. I think we can let that one slip. She let the moment linger, and then opened the case containing the binding rod. Do you know what this is? By the time Taija got to the 4th person, named by Jedwin, she was in a foul mood. 3 more dark friends, worms eating away at the hole from the inside. For a moment, she was almost tempted to start using the binding rod on everyone when they were promoted to aspirant or Aes Sedai. But no, she had her principles. If someone was subject to plausible accusations, it was one thing, an easy and effective way to prove innocence or guilt. Doing it for everyone was a step too far. She wanted to build a better society, not treat everyone like criminals and replicate the White Tower's own dysfunctions. So, Emal, do you know why I want to speak to you? Taija carefully concealed her contempt. A full Aes Sedai, and almost certainly a dark friend. It made her feel ill, homicidally so. Man looked nervously around the room before his eyes went back to her. I think I might. He hesitated. There is no secret mission, is there? Taija shook her head and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. Nope. He at least seemed to be smarter than the others. Emil hesitated again, even longer this time. Taija let the silence linger. You've found out that I am a dark friend, and this is my last chance at saving my life. Taija just nodded. Correct. Clearly much smarter than the others. It at least explained how he was able to become a full Aes Sedai. I have little time for dark friends. Death is the only fate for them. However, if someone chooses to serve the light of their own accord, well then they're no longer a dark friend, are they? She leant forward. Tell me, Emil, which is it that you want to be? A dedicated servant of the light, making up for having temporarily strayed, or a dark friend? He blanched slightly. I wish to serve the light. Excellent. You'll understand why I need certain assurances, though. Taija got up and opened the door to the room, poking her head outside the anti-eavesdropping wards to call Alexei in. Then she pulled the binding rod out of its case. Do you know what this is? Once Emil had sworn on the binding rod, the interrogation began. When and why did you become a dark friend? He sighed and looked down. It all started when I was 15. I was approached by some friends from another noble house. You'll be giving us their names later. He nodded. They came to me and asked if I wanted to get ahead for my family, to work with them to help my parents. You see, my house had fallen onto hard times. Of course, at the time, they never said they were dark friends. That came later. By the end of his talk, confession, Taija supposed, she practically had his life story. It was pathetic, really, and a bit disturbing in many ways. Drawn in for personal advantage, and then his true master only revealed gradually, once he was already in too deep. Then the crimes escalated. With the oath he'd sworn on the binding rod, there was no way for him to conceal them. He was certainly guilty of murder, a few times over. Spying for the Shadow, too, obviously. The only thing she could really say in his defense there was that he didn't seem to have done anything heinous, except when ordered to. Not all that much of a defense, really. She got a couple more names to add to the list, too. Actually, she was getting hopeful that she might catch all of the dark friends in the hall. The names given by the last four overlapped considerably. She only had 2 new ones now. Of course, she couldn't assume that that was everyone, but the numbers didn't seem to be expanding as she interrogated more people. 2 more arrests to make, and then hopefully she could be done with this shitty business, as long as they didn't give any more names anyway. After a moment's thought, Taija turned to Alexei. Take Emil away. We'll decide what to do with him later. She glanced at him, taking his cooperation into account. That was going to be another difficult decision. She hadn't had to force him to confess. Based on his testimony, he wasn't exactly an enthusiastic dark friend either. On the other hand, he'd only confessed once she'd him right there at her mercy. He hadn't come to her first. Her heart told her to execute him with the rest, but she'd have to think about it. Taija was about to head out when another thought occurred to her. Alexei, order a lockdown of the hall. No one leaves or enters without explicit permission from me. Present it as an exercise. They'll realize we're onto them sooner or later, and we've been lucky so far. I don't want to push that any further. He gave her a decisive nod, and Taija headed out to find Egwene. She could be her backup. Tel and Nynaeve were guarding the already interrogated dark friends, and Alexei could help them. The numbers were getting a bit high for her little group, but right then, she needed to be extra careful about who she trusted. Taija headed over to the hall's canteen to the sound of a bell ringing across the complex, warning everyone that a lockdown was in effect. Apparently Morth and Asar were both there together. If she remembered correctly, the 2 aspirants were a couple. There were so many people in the hall now that it was quite hard to keep track. Both weren't insignificantly strong either. There'd be a lot of other initiates in the canteen. It seemed the time for subtlety was over. Taija couldn't see how she could do this discreetly, although she'd try, of course. She glanced over at Egwene, who was walking grim-faced beside her. Let me take the lead on this. I'll try to do it peacefully, but it may get violent. If anyone takes a shot at me, I want you to try to protect the other initiates. I'll deal with whoever's attacking us. Of course, Taija. She was always a bit short when she was angry, but then so was Taija. They entered the large canteen to see close on 100 initiates and aspirants scattered around it. It really was incredible how fast the hall had expanded from its humble origins. Even with that many people in it, the room still looked fairly empty. Taija scanned the room and her eyes landed on the couple sitting together with two other aspirants. There was a nervous energy in the room, but that was hardly surprising with the lockdown on. The aspirants all stood as Taija approached the table, just as they should. She gave them a nod. "Asa, Morth, do you have a moment? I'd like a word in private." Asa nodded and stepped away from the table, but Morth put a hand on his arm. "What's this about Taija Sedai?" The tension at the table ratcheted up a notch, and Taija could feel the other initiates in the room starting to pay more attention. Just something that would be better discussed in private. Nothing too important. Taija tried to smile reassuringly. She had to assume they were all holding the power. They weren't going to get a free shot at her, though. Inverted tendrils of spirit surrounded her, ready to detect any webs. Morth gave her a bow. "My apologies," Taija said, but now is not convenient." Asa shot Morth a look of confusion. "But," she shook her head and he shut up. Taija sighed. "I'm sorry, to be clear, that wasn't a request." "Oh, well, of course in that." While Morth was mid-sentence, both the aspirants that were sitting with them struck from either side of Taija. They'd been well trained, taking advantage of being at the edge of her peripheral vision and giving no warning before they spun. Of course, Taija was expecting it, so she was slicing their webs before they even had time to form. Taija spun her own webs. No point trying to simultaneously shield four people who were holding the power. Sedar lashed out. Far faster than the aspirants could spin another web, Taija sent the two who tried to attack her flying across the room to land on tables, smashing through them with the impact. At the same time, she violently swept the legs out from under Asar and Morth, slamming them face first into their table. At the last second, she spun a cushion of air to spare their faces. They didn't actually try to attack her, innocent until proven guilty, however bad things might look for them. Seconds later, all four of them were shielded and bound in air. Taija looked round at the stunned faces of the initiates darted around the room. Fuck, how was she going to explain this? Inspiration struck. "Egwene, you deal with the initiates. I'll get these people back for interrogation." Before she could argue, Taija was already heading for the door, pulling the four bound aspirants behind her. Depressing, depressing, depressing. By the time Taija and Alexei got to Asa, after interrogating the other three aspirants, she was in an even worse mood than before. Their strident denials were inevitably revealed for the lies they were once they gave in and swore on the binding rod. That's why she was unimpressed when Asa's first words, when she released the webs keeping him blind, deaf and silent, were an angry protest. "What in the light is this? Why have you attacked me and Morth?" "I'm not in the mood. You're a dark friend, just like the rest of them." Taija practically spat the words as she slammed the binding rod down on the table in front of him. Horror painted its way across his face. "I am not a dark friend. Please, you have to believe me." Kenyatta had begged too. Taija ignored his words. "This is a binding rod. If spirit is spun into it, any oath sworn while holding it will be completely and utterly binding on the person. If you're not a dark friend, I'm not. You can prove it easily enough. Swear to speak only the truth and to answer any questions honestly and to the fullest of your ability. If you're not a dark friend, I can release you from the oath straight away." His horror was turning to anger, and after a moment his hand whipped out and grabbed the binding rod, his eyes boring into Taija's. "Go on then, tell me when." Taija wasn't sure whether the churning feeling in her stomach was relief or embarrassment at his willingness to swear, but it was quickly becoming clear that Asa might be the exception among her prisoners. Still, she needed to check. Taija spun spirit into the rod. "All right, it's ready. I swear to speak only the truth and to answer any questions honestly and to the fullest of my ability." He released the rod. "There, now bloody well ask." Taija winced slightly at his tone. If he wasn't a dark friend, she'd excuse him the disrespect. He had every right to be offended and was about to get some very bad news about his lover. "Are you or have you ever been a dark friend, or have you tried to betray the Hall in any other way?" "No." His answer was blunt. He hesitated and then continued, "I have never been a dark friend. I do not serve the shadow. I walk in the light and have been loyal to the Hall." "There, are you satisfied now?" Taija quickly nodded. "Yes, I'm sorry." He needed at least some explanation beyond just an apology. First, though, she should release him. The very idea of leaving someone innocent bound was disgusting. Once again she spun spirit. If you hold the binding rod again, I'll release you from the oath immediately. You just need to say, I unswear all oaths that bind me. I'll just warn you it'll hurt. I'm sorry for that. He gave her an unimpressed look and took hold of the binding rod once more. I unswear all oaths that bind me. As Taija watched, he shuddered hard and let out a small whimper of pain. Then it was over. Again, I'm sorry, Asa. I wouldn't have subjected this to you without good reason. What have I ever done to make you question my loyalty? Nothing. Taija looked down and then met his eyes again. It's nothing you've done, but we've caught a number of dark friends in the last 2 days, and more than one named you as someone they thought was one of them. I don't think it's anything you've done, but rather. Realization dawned in his eyes. Morth. Yes, for what it's worth, I really am sorry. She really did. Taija tried to keep her voice steady. I'm sorry, she denied it at first, but eventually she admitted it after swearing on the binding rod. His face crumpled. She was watching someone's life collapse in front of her, and there wasn't really anything she could do about it. What's going to happen to her? He interrupted. No, I know. There can only be one penalty for joining the shadow. Light take me, how didn't I see it? What in the sun-blinded spawn of the shadow did I miss? Anger suddenly fled from him, replaced by devastation, and he stifled a sob. Alexei was already moving in, before Taija could look to him for help. He jerked his head to the door and she quickly got up, releasing the webs on Asa as Alexei put his arm round him. Chapter 166. As one love breaks another, one forms. Chapter text chapter CXXVI. As one love breaks, another forms. Rand wrinkled his nose at the stench of the city. It was teeming with people, many of them armed, many of them ragged, often the same people. It made for slow progress through its streets, but the crowds did shy back from his hard-faced ale escort. In the presence of the ale, he wasn't sure they even noticed him, or the two Aes Sedai riding at his side. Cadsuane from the White Tower and Urtian from the hall. Half-trained children playing at the title, just like you. Half the time Rand was fairly sure Luz Thurin was just being deliberately provocative. There might not be much sign of the insanity said to have felled the man, but he was bitter, more bitter than anyone else Rand had ever encountered. You would be more than bitter if you had done what I had done, seen what I had seen, and were now stuck in a farm boy's head. Perhaps if he tried to be more helpful, he'd have less to be bitter about. Do I not give the Lord Dragon useful advice? It was true, Luz Thurin occasionally did, although recently he had been increasingly negative and unpleasant. The morning after Taija's purge, she had a large chunk of the hall assembled to watch the Dark Friends' trials. The Aes Sedai who had brought the binding rod were invited too. Now that the interrogations were complete, Taija wanted it to be open and public, for them to see that the hall could tidy up its own messes and what happened to Dark Friends. A panel of 3 Aes Sedai sat in judgment on them. Taija had excused herself. It was meant to be at least semi-independent. Obviously, Aes Sedai in the hall couldn't be completely independent. Instead, she'd asked the leader of the Tower Aes Sedai delegation to sit on the panel, along with Daima and Egwene. After all, the Tower had provided the binding rod, and it symbolized that, at least when it came to the fight against the Shadow, the Tower and the hall walked in lockstep. Daima and Egwene were the other two simply because Taija trusted them to be level-headed and sensible. As it was, the trials were very short. Given the oaths the Dark Friends had sworn, all the panel of judges needed to do was ask them if they were guilty and what crimes they'd committed for the Shadow. Each of them was obviously given the chance to speak in their own defense. However, after their confessions, all they could really do was argue in mitigation for their crimes. There was no question of their guilt. Some of them started to talk and then choke, clearly trying to lie and then prevented by the oaths. They still managed to speak about how they wished to serve the light and regretted ever joining the shadow. Hardly surprising now that they'd been caught. The only one who had anything vaguely convincing to say was Emil, spinning a story about how he was tricked into becoming a dark friend and lured in deeper and deeper, never wanting to take part, but always feeling trapped and unable to escape. He finished by explaining how he'd confessed without being forced, because he truly wanted to escape from under the hold of the shadow, and that he was ready to do anything to redeem himself. Taija was rather skeptical of his conversion. In fact, she suspected he was just cleverer than the rest of them. However, even if he was managing to bend the truth, it was impossible for him to outright lie about not wanting to commit crimes for the shadow and feeling trapped. Ultimately, the fact that he confessed before he was forced did have to hold some weight. Obviously, it was up to the judges what sentence they'd impose. Taija had made that clear. Personally, she had no sympathy for any of the defendants. However, she also did point out to Egwene and Daemon the advantages of having a public example that there was a way out for dark friends if they looked for it, rather than waiting to be caught, albeit Emil had still needed to be caught first. Asa watched from the crowd, bleary-eyed after a sleepless night of tears, as the accused dark friends were lined up in front of the panel of judges. Not that there was any doubt about their guilt. Not after the testimony they'd all heard. His stomach churned in a mixture of rage, despair, and betrayal. How could she have done that? Not just to the light, but to him. Did she even feel anything for him? Was he a blind idiot who just refused to see reality? He pulled his eyes away from the back of Morth's head. Just seeing her made him feel sick to his stomach. He'd spent the night doubting his own memories too, but at least Nynaeve, Sedai, had given him a clean bill of health. So he was just an idiot rather than compelled. Not that Nynaeve Sedai had put it so unpleasantly, but he knew the truth. Damer stood and started to pronounce the panel's judgment on the accused. Charles Jedwin, guilty on all charges, severing and death. Peril Torval, guilty on all charges, severing and death. He named every single one of them. Of course, Morth was the same, guilty on all charges, severing and death. He loved her, had loved her. The sentence still gave him some satisfaction, while making him want to throw up at the same time. The sentences were all the same, even Emil. Emil Cashin, guilty on all charges. The court has noted your confession. However, your crimes are clear, and the fact that you needed to be caught before you chose to confess speaks for yourself. You are sentenced to severing and death. Asa shot a glance at Taija Sedai, who was stood off to one side. Her eyes had narrowed at that. Did she approve? Then his attention was drawn back to Damer as he continued. Anyone who has been lured into the service of the shadow know this. No one can walk in the shadow for so long that they cannot return to the light. Should you come to the leaders of the hall, confess your crimes willingly, you will be treated with leniency, welcomed back into the light. The sooner you return, the easier the path can be. However, if we are the ones to find you, there will be no mercy. He turned his eyes to the aspirants and Aes Sedai holding shields on the prisoners. Take them away to face their punishments. Were they not going to execute them publicly? That was the way things were done, but it seemed not. Asa sagged with relief all the same. He had been going to make himself watch, sate his burning rage at Morth with the sight of her death. But really he didn't want to. As Ale warriors dragged the Dark Friends to their fate, Morth turned to look at the crowd, and her desperate eyes found his. After a second he looked away. He had nothing for her anymore. Rianne looked at the extensive, walled complex, and before turning back to Elaine. And you say this did not exist 2 years ago. Indeed. Elaine's nod was regal, then she ruined the image by smiling. It is incredible, is it not? All Rianne could do was nod. The White Tower was more impressive, of course, but to build this so quickly, she pulled herself together. Well, no point in wasting time. Let us head in. Before she truly got to know Elaine, she had dismissed the stories of the hall as rumors and tales of Taija Sedai being from the age of legends as utterly ridiculous. Of course she had learnt otherwise, but to see what had been done here with her own eyes, it was something different. It did not take long for them to reach the gates. The young man and woman there, aspirants if Rianne remembered Elaine's explanation of the patches correctly, bowed low to Elaine, but they still used a slicing weave on each of them. Like Elaine, she and every other surviving member of the knitting circle had developed the habit of hiding their ability to channel under inverted weaves. It was vanished, and she was reminded again of just how strong Elaine was. Of course, once they were through the gates, they all reapplied the weaves, inverting them as ever. The kin had never been soft, but those of them that had been in Ebu Dar for the Tzeentchian invasion were something different now, forged in the crucible of the Rahad. It was ironic, really. Elaine had promised them that they could become Aes Sedai, that the White Tower was not the only route. Once upon a time, they would have given anything to become Aes Sedai. Now, though, Rianne suspected the rest of the knitting circle shared her view. It would be nice, but she had nothing more to prove. The hall teemed with people. Initiates and aspirants going about their business, the occasional man or woman with the patch of a full Aes Sedai striding through them. It was hard to believe there were so many channelers there. There might even be more than the kin. It was hard to tell, and they did not make their status obvious. All manner of dress could be seen, people from every nation, including what she recognized as numerous ale. One thing that did stand out, though, was the number of women dressed in practical breeches. It was somewhat surprising, actually, if not for the war in the Rahad, when such things as the niceties of dress had fallen away. Rian might even have been shocked. They worked their way through the hall until they reached their destination. There was nothing to mark the building out as anything special other than the two ale warriors stood in front of the door. However, Rian suspected that that was the least of its defenses. The two men bowed to them, and Elaine gave them a shallower bow back before leading the group in. Inside, they were met by a middle-aged lady who greeted them with a low bow. Elaine Sedai. It was an incongruous sight. The woman was not weak in the power and was probably 3 times Elaine's age. If you would follow me, a reception room has been prepared for you and your guests. She must have been an initiate. Thank you, Dreimler. I hope you are well. How are your children and husband? Have they been settling in well? I know it was a huge change for them. Children and husband, for an initiate. They're well, thank you. Since the last time we spoke, Euron's found work with the carpenters, and the children are doing well in the school. The woman chuckled. Light, they'll be able to read better than me in no time, who would have thought? Better study hard then. Elaine laughed, and then looked back to Rian as they headed up the stairs. Dreimler, this is Rian Corley of the Kin. She quickly ran through the other members of the Knitting Circle's names. Of course, she did not introduce them as the Knitting Circle. She knew and respected their secrecy. This is Dreimler Hararin, initiate of the Hall. Another difference with the White Tower and the Kin, in fact. While there was clearly a hierarchy, there was no way that a novice would have been introduced like that. Fascinating. Pleased to meet you, Dreimler. Rian nodded politely to her, as did the other members of the Knitting Circle. It did not take long to reach their destination. Dreimler knocked on the door to a room, poked her head inside, and then opened it wide. Please come in. Elaine went first, and Rian followed just behind her. Inside was a large table with a small, dark-skinned woman sitting at the end of it, Taija Kosola. She looked as young as the first time they had met, although with a channeler that meant little, but perhaps a little less tired. At their entrance, she rose with a smile and came round to greet them. One thing was certain, she did not look like the head of an institution that rivaled the White Tower. Rian was the eldest of the Kin, who took discretion extremely seriously, and she was sure that she was considerably less unassuming than this woman. Compared to the Amiel in seat, of course appearances could be deceiving. When she had first met Elaine, she had taken the girl for a soft, delusional teenager. Taija gave Elaine a hug and then turned her gaze on the Kin. She looked slightly worried, but then Rian suspected she always did. You must be the Knitting Circle, welcome. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm Taija Kosola. Elaine has told me a lot about you. Please, find yourselves seats, make yourselves comfortable, and then we can all introduce ourselves properly. There's a lot to discuss. Refreshments should be coming soon, although you can never be totally sure with these things. Rian was reminded again of how odd her accent was, slightly harsh, emphasizing consonants and chopping words off, almost the opposite of the Sintian. Please, sit. Taija started to bustle around, urging them into seats. It was a strange experience, utterly alien to the White Tower or, as far as Rian knew, to any other form of high society. But then the Age of Legends was an alien place. As Taija settled them all down, she realized what was truly incongruous about it. Possibly the most powerful woman in the world was treating them like equals. After the Sintian, her willingness to submit herself to the White Tower had more than waned, and she, along with the rest of the Knitting Circle, had come mostly out of respect for Elaine. She would have to see what Taija had to say, but suddenly she found herself rather more interested in becoming Aes Sedai than she had been when she had first set foot in the hall's grounds. Once the introductions were complete, Taija glanced at Elaine. Odd that the woman was deferring to her. Elaine did not seem surprised, though. So as you know, you are here to negotiate a joining between the Kin and the Hall. The last battle is coming, and the forces of the light need to stand together. The Hall also offers you the chance to become Aes Sedai, true Aes Sedai, in the manner of the Age of Legends. Rhianna noticed a twitch on Taija's face at those words, although she was not sure why. The woman had a poor poker face, another difference with the White Tower. That seemed to be Rhiann's cue, though. "Thank you, Elaine," said I. It seemed strange to call her that again, but this was a formal occasion. "Taija," said I. She turned her attention to the woman at the head of the table. "Elaine Sedai has told us much of what the Hall has to offer, and we can see the benefits to us. We of course wish to serve the light in any way that we can too. However, the kin are a proud and independent group that have stood for themselves for centuries. Why should we stand aside in the face of your organization?" Obviously, she was lying through her teeth about that. The kin's relationship with the White Tower precluded any of that. Taija blinked at that and took a moment to gather her thoughts. "Well, hopefully, I can deal with your concerns. Firstly, I see no incompatibility between being a member of the kin and a member of the Hall of Servants. Everything Elaine has told me about you specifically, and the kin in general, has been positive. In my time, being Aes Sedai was important, but it wasn't everything about a person. I was an Aes Sedai and a scholar. Others were healers, advisors, guardsmen, artists. You get the point. There's nothing stopping you from being both a wise woman and an Aes Sedai. Of course, if you join the Hall, you'll have to follow its rules, but those rules aren't like the White Towers. We're rather more relaxed." She winced slightly and seemed to reconsider her words. "I mean, we treat our students as adults, not that we don't take things seriously. Anyway, if you don't feel this is the place for you, all you need to do is leave. The point is, we do not treat our students like children. This isn't the White Tower." There was definitely some bitterness there. While it would depend on skill, I'm also fairly confident in saying that any member of the kin who joins the Hall will be able to join as an aspirant rather than starting as an initiate. The time that you have spent serving the world and developing your skills would not go unacknowledged. We have a system under which White Tower Aes Sedai who join us for training receive an aspirant's patch with the flame of Tar Valon on it. An image suddenly appeared in the air in front of her. A similar system for the kin seems eminently reasonable. Any ideas what kind of symbol might work for you? Once she was out of the Hall's grounds, Rhiann wove a gateway back to Ebu Dar for herself and the rest of the knitting circle. Elaine was staying in Keemlin, citing some sort of business there, although Rhiann suspected she just wanted to see Matt. There was a lot to think about after that meeting. Her time fighting with Elaine in the Rahad had convinced her of the value of the Hall and what it could offer, and so she had already been inclined towards the proposed joining with the Hall. Of course, the talks had been a lot easier than she had expected. She had walked in with a negotiating position that she thought was somewhat extreme, with the aim of meeting Taija somewhere in the middle, and then Taija had almost immediately given her everything she'd been going to ask for, let alone everything she actually expected to get. She would have assumed the woman was an incompetent negotiator, but based on everything Elaine had said, and Taija's own body language, she just truly believed in what she was offering. It was refreshing. Rhiann would of course need to discuss matters properly with the rest of the knitting circle when they were safely home, but she expected little argument. Unfortunately, the bigger problem was the kin who had not been in Ebu Dar at the time of the Tzeentchian invasion. Elaine had met with them too, but they had failed to see past the surface. A teenage girl with delusions of grandeur. Those of the kin who had been in Ebu Dar had learnt the truth quickly enough, but that only went so far. The rest of them maintained their devotion to the ideals of the White Tower. That was not to say that Rhiann did not still think highly of the White Tower, even centuries after she had left, but the perspective she had gained from Elaine, the Tzeentchian, and now Taija changed things somewhat. While the idea of becoming Aes Sedai still held a certain thrill, she no longer saw herself as lesser. However, now she had to worry about how to prevent a split in the kin. Technically speaking, she was the eldest, but that only went so far. When the others vehemently rejected any suggestion of association with the Hall of Servants, seeing it as a betrayal of the White Tower, finding a middle ground was difficult. The Hall's relaxed approach might be enough to prevent a schism, and she would certainly try, but somehow she doubted she would succeed. Yes summoned his courage. Not that he normally felt that he lacked in courage, but this was different. Less than 2 years ago, he would have thought his fate would be to spit in Sightblinder's eye, his only future to die alone fighting the shadow. Instead, the Karakan and Taija Sedai, no, just Taija Kosola now, had saved him from that. The toll that he owed to them was without measure. He would pay it, as he would pay his toll to his people through service. However, that gift meant that he could now look to the future, as did recent events. Arrogance brought toll with it, but pride in one's achievements was permissible, as long as one did not allow the pride to become overwhelming. Yer was feeling a great deal of pride at that moment. It had only been a day since he had knelt before the hall's banner and been embraced by Taija Kosola, Tel Janin, and Jahar Narishma, but he still felt the glow of pride at the badge of the Aes Sedai decorating the left breast of his cadencer. He was the first of the Ale to become Aes Sedai. That was something to boast about around the campfire. Taija Kosola must have spoken to the wise ones too, for several had been there at the ceremony. Jorana, who would have been wise one of his hold if he had not been able to channel, had even embraced him. Holding his shoulders and looking up at him, she had told him that he represented hope for the future for the Ale. Truly the proudest moment of his life. His newfound status as an Aes Sedai also meant that he could do something that he had been thinking about almost since he came to the hall. She did not look like any of the Ale. Her darker skin and deep brown hair were different to the women he was used to. Her height, too, it contrasted with his. Yet despite that, she was more than appealing to his eyes. Not buxom, she in many ways resembled Taija Kosola. However, where Taija Kosola for all of her achievements appeared vague and awkward, she was determination incarnate. She had the will of a wise one, the ambition of a clan chief, and the honor of an Aes Sedai. At a young age, she was already a leader in the hall, and Yer had no doubt that she would go further, become stronger. Her determination to serve the light, to push herself, it was almost Ale. But perhaps that was what attracted him to her, that she was in many ways so similar to the Ale, yet at the same time so different. The world had changed with the arrival of Taija Kosola. The Ale had changed with her and the Karakan. He could move with that change, and now that he was a full Aes Sedai, he could act on his desires. "I see you, Egwene Ver," he spoke her name, stilling the trembling in his hands. "Oh, yeah, I haven't congratulated you on your promotion. I should say, yeah, said I even. I was so pleased for you." He tried not to be drawn into her smile. "Thank you. I was most honored to have been chosen." She gave him a bow and turned to leave, and he knew he had to speak now. "Egwene Al." No, Wetlanders did not use the full name. "Egwene, I have a gift for you if you would have it." That made her hesitate, confusion painting its way across her face. "A gift? Why?" Yer ignored the question, reaching into his belt pouch and pulling out the necklace he had put there before he sought her out. He placed it into her hands before she could say anything more. "I have seen you, and what I have seen pleases me. As you take on leadership in the hall with your determination, destroy its enemies with such dedication and ability, I see it. I think of my own skills, to inspire and teach, my strengths as a warrior lightning fast with the spear and faster still with the power. I think to join them with yours. He nearly stumbled over his words, feel it would be fitting if I could walk together with you." Egwene stood there frozen in place, the golden necklace glittering in her hand, looking utterly bemused. This was not the reaction that Yer had hoped for. After a moment he tried to explain. "It is made from the treasures of the Tzeentch. I took the gold from those that I had defeated. The Tzeentch are honorless dogs who bring only death and destruction." He had heard the rumors of what they had done to Egwene Ver, which had helped him to choose his regard gift, and I thought to turn their ugliness into something of beauty. I reforged the metal with the power into this necklace because I wished it to grace your neck. Egwene slowly turned it over in her hands. "It's beautiful, yeah. You clearly have a talent, but why are you giving this to me? I don't understand." Yer resisted the urge to sigh. That would give him great tow. It had been his choice to pursue a wetlander. To expect her to just understand the ways of the Ale would be foolish, even when she had spent a brief time as an apprentice to the wise ones. There was no shame in needing to have something explained when you had had no reason to know of it. His friendship with Eben had told him that Wetlander courtship customs were different, but he had no intention of emulating them. For one thing he suspected, he would not be successful in attempting to enlist Egwene in pranks on other Aes Sedai. "I shall explain. It is a regard gift among the Ale." "Oh." Egwene interrupted. Oh, she turned it over in her hands again, and then looked at him. Truly looked at him for what he realized might be the first time. Yer preened under her gaze. It was good to be looked at like that by a woman. Even if she turned him down, she would have truly seen him. The silence lingered a little longer, and then Egwene spoke again, her voice a mutter. Taija has been going on at me that I need a boyfriend. Did that mean Taija would approve of the match? Truly, the light smiled on him. Egwene's voice returned to a more normal volume. All right, why not? Thank you. It's a beautiful necklace. I make no promises, but walk with me, yeah, and we shall talk. Chapter 167. Vigorous Negotiations. Chapter text, Chapter CX6, Vigorous Negotiations. The Hall of Servants. Benny's return from Saldir was the highlight of Taija's week. Not only did she have her friend back, but Benny reported that Saldir shouldn't be causing problems anymore. The issue there had been dealt with. When Taija tried to press her on it, she just smiled enigmatically and went full on Tower Aes Sedai. Some things are better left unspoken, Taija, my dear. Taija gave her most unimpressed look. Benny, we're behind privacy wards, fighting a war for survival, and you want to not tell me what you've been up to so that you can seem suitably enigmatic. Seriously. She looked grumpy for a second and then grinned. Oh, very well, since you ask so nicely. Still, it is sad that an old woman is not allowed to keep her secrets. You're not even that old. That is not the point, Taija, my dear, not the point at all. Anyway, one of the Forsaken was indeed present in Saldir and had been turning its rulers against the Hall. She is now dead, as are a number of other dark friends. Taija's eyes widened. One of the Forsaken. She's dead. Which one? How did you know? How did you kill her? Benny looked like the cat that got the cream as she explained. Really, I would have thought after your own experiences with me you would realize that people from your time are not as good at hiding as you might think you are. All right, fine. Although we'll need to explore this further with at least Alexei, but how in the light did you kill one of the Forsaken? Or did someone else kill her? I'm not sure you'd be able to. No offense, Taija thought for a second. Did you do something with Forkroot? Benny's smile didn't waver. Oh no, I simply poisoned her and arranged for another dark friend to be blamed for it. Taija looked into her kindly eyes and wondered what in the light had happened to make people like this in this time. Benny, I say this with the greatest of affection and also half an eye on my food supplies, but you are probably the scariest of my friends, in this time or my own. Taija was in her office when Alexei finally decided that it was time to talk to her about whatever was on his mind. Once she closed the door, poured him some tea, and spun a ward against eavesdropping, he got going. So, when I visited the tower to get the binding rod, I was approached by an Aes Sedai. You were. Taija resisted the urge to start teasing him. This was clearly something serious, and he wouldn't appreciate her winding him up when he wanted to talk business. He nodded, either not noticing or ignoring her amusement. Alusha Gamies of the Red Adger. Oh, Red Adger. Yuck, Taija's amusement fled. I can't say I've heard of her. No, I hadn't either. I think she generally avoided the White Tower. He took a breath. Anyway, she told me some interesting things about the Red Adger. Basically, they're virtually extinct. Their leadership, other than Aleda, is dead or turned, and there are fewer than 40 of them left. They also don't have a purpose anymore, obviously. Apparently there's talk of disbanding the Adger. Taija shrugged and smiled. I don't see the problem, to be honest. He laughed, although it was a slightly nervous, awkward laugh. No, neither did I, but anyway, Alusha came to me with a proposition, which we've been discussing together. The White Tower used to essentially have full control over channelers in the Westlands. Any that acted up risked having the Aes Sedai descending on them. Now we have the Hall as well, which is already overtaking their numbers, and we don't control our members as tightly as they do. We've also found out about the kin and the sea folk, and obviously there are the dedicated. That's a lot of channelers, and numbers are rising. What she suggested is essentially a watch for channelers. It took Taija a moment to parse that. You mean a police force? Alexei looked confused. An official organization dedicated to upholding the law and catching criminals. Oh, yes, police. He chewed over the unfamiliar word. Anyway, she's suggesting that this could be the new purpose of the Red Adger. He saw Taija's scowl coming almost before it formed. She also acknowledged that that's not going to happen without the Hall being involved. Taija looked at him carefully. That's usually perceptive for one of the Red Adger. Alexei nods. Yes, she's really not like most of the Tower Eyes, said I. Oh, really? Far more open. She has a rather odd sense of humor, too. He lost focus for a second. Right, so she wants a sort of watch force over channelers and wants us involved, too, presumably under the leadership of the Red Adger. Taija's tone made her opinion of that clear. No, Alexei shook his head. She's been pretty clear that it would need to be a joint thing. Obviously, I haven't agreed to anything, but what we've been working out between us is more a plan with Hall and Tower Aes Sedai working together to find and take criminals. Then they can be tried under the rules of their own organization or a joint court if they're not affiliated to anyone. I've been absolutely clear that members of the Hall will not be being sent for trial in the White Tower. All right, good. A thought occurred to Taija. Is this an official approach? Is she the head of the Red Adger or something like that? Alexei turned red. Ah, no, this is just her idea, but I think it's a good one. Taija's eyebrows shot up at that. So she's come up with this idea without any official backing and wants us to help make it happen. Yes, but. Sometimes she was reminded that Alexei was still in his mid-20s. With him, it was easy to forget, but this was feeling more and more like one of those conversations with Elaine or Egwene. But I think it's a good idea. It needs fleshing out, and obviously it will need the agreement of the White Tower, but I think there's something to it. I wouldn't raise a hand to save the Red Adger, but I don't think we should throw away a good idea just to grind them into nothing either. All right. Anything would need to at least consider the other channeling organizations too. I'm not sure exactly how that would work, but I'm not against it in principle. Tell me everything, and we'll discuss it. Unless I hear something I really don't like, I'd like you to keep on discussing things with this Alusha. Invite her over here too. She should see how things work firsthand. Then perhaps once you've developed things a bit more, I'd like to meet her, and we can talk about how to move things forward. Sheena Eben channeled Sedin and Sedar into the walls of the watchtower as Helena watched. After a minute or so, he stepped back, panting slightly from the effort. That was one more fort that would be almost impossible to breach. Before he turned away, he glanced towards the Blight. The Sheenarans had all been saying the same thing. It was quiet, too quiet. They seemed to be split on whether that was a good or bad thing, though. Some said any relief from the shadow spawn was good. Others said it was a sign that the shadow was building up to something. The Hall of Servants Pellard bowed to Alexei Sedai when he reached the hall's gates before hitting him with the compulsory slicing weave. Welcome back, Alexei Sedai. Thank you, Pellard. It's good to be home. Have a nice afternoon. As Alexei Sedai headed away, Pellard looked after him before returning to his vigil. After a moment, Gileth, his fellow guard for the afternoon, broke the silence. Is he coming back from the White Tower again? Probably. Pellard lowered his voice. I've heard that he's been working on something with a Tower Eye, said I. Perhaps it would make sense with the way he keeps going there. Yes, but that's not the mad part. The mad part is I heard she's from the Red Adger. No. Yes, Pellard nodded. He's going and meeting with a Red Adger Eyes, said I, almost every other day. That can't be easy. He's so dedicated to the Hall, it's inspirational. Really it is. Mazrim Tame was walking through the Hall's grounds after teaching an initiate's class when he saw Alexei walking beside a woman with an ageless face. He resisted the urge to scowl, instead just giving the two of them a polite nod. He might not agree with everything in the hall, but politeness cost little. He had heard rumors that Alexei was working with an Aes Sedai and one of the Red Adger no less. It was a shock to see it was more than just a rumor. He was surprised the man had the stomach for it, even being such a lapdog to Taija as he was. Still, he had to concede there was probably some higher purpose to it. Taija and Alexei did seem to strongly dislike the Red Adger, even if he felt they were far too soft about the Tower Aes Sedai. Not that it concerned him. They were his allies, not his friends. They could work with whoever they wanted, as long as they did not expect him to join in. What was the old tongue word that Taija liked so much? Oh yes, fuck the Red Adger. With that thought, his mind turned back to pondering how much longer it would take Noryuan to become an Aes Sedai. A couple of weeks after Taija's conversation with Alexei about his police proposals, she was sat at her desk, going through endless paperwork and reports, having had to spend a chunk of her morning on discipline after a brawl between initiates. Why they thought that their nationalities should have any bearing on who dated who she had no idea. The glamour of being first among servants was almost non-existent. The main benefit was paperwork. That, and at least she sometimes got shallow curtsies from Tower Aes Sedai. The reports were almost relentlessly depressing. The only positive was that Rand had been expanding his reach yet again. Almost the whole continent was behind him these days. With a sigh, Taija put down a note on failing crops and food storage around the world and picked up another. A small town in arid demand seemed to have been almost wiped out as everyone there descended into homicidal madness, killing anyone close to them. Horrific. Presumably another of those bubbles of evil that have been popping up around the world. That report decided it for her. She needed to do something more enjoyable for her own sanity. With a decisive movement, Taija put her papers down and headed for the door. It was only when she reached the corridor outside, receiving a bow from the initiate who was reading there, that Taija realized she had no idea what to do. The whole world was going to shit, so going off to sneak into a random royal palace to admire the art might not be a great idea. Also, Tell was off on an outreach mission, and he was the only one who'd really appreciate doing that. There were no competition matches going on right then, so she couldn't watch one of those. Intruding on one of the classes would just be annoying for the teacher. Worst of all, with Tell's absence, she couldn't even just go and bug him for attention. With a small growl of frustration, Taija turned back towards her office. Then she remembered Alexei should be free. Maybe he'd be up for a drink. They could disguise themselves and head into Keemlin. It only took asking a couple of people before Taija established that Alexei was in his office. Soon as she heard that she was making a beeline for it, without waiting for the initiate to finish what they were saying. A bit rude maybe, but she'd had enough of the hall for the day. When Taija got to Alexei's office, she burst straight in. "Alexei, you wouldn't believe the kind of day I'm having, do you?" She trailed off. There was a woman on her front on Alexei's desk, with an ageless face, naked, and he was standing behind her and light. Taija's brain stopped functioning for a moment, and then her face was heating. She had time to see Alexei blanch, and the woman look up, her face as composed as any Tower Aes Sedai's, although that composure was being ruined by the rapidly spreading blush on her pale skin. "Shit, sorry." Taija fled without any further words. Back in her office, sitting there trying to get unwanted images out of her head, Taija forced her mind to turn back to practical matters. Rand had been uniting the Westlands, and obviously he'd got the dedicated under him too. Sinchen was out for obvious reasons. Tempting as it was to go over there and rain fire on Fortuona's head, that was her disgust for their system talking, not practicality. It would just be a distraction from what was important, weakening the light when the last battle was coming. However, people in this time thought of the world as so much smaller a place than she did. In her own time, she could be on the far side of the planet, in as long as it took her to step through a gateway. Taija had known people who literally commuted between continents, although admittedly not many of them. There were two glaring omissions from people in this time's thinking, and she was including Rand in that. Her efforts at learning about the post-breaking world had at least paid some dividends. What about Shara and the southern continent? She'd been told that the southern continent was a blasted wasteland known as the Land of Madmen. It didn't sound very positive. However, no one seemed to have actually been there for generations. As for Shara, Amy's had told her that they were deeply hostile to outsiders. But again, the only people they interacted with were dedicated and sea folk. Perhaps she should try sending someone over to each of those places to see if they might be allies for the last battle. It would have to be someone strong in the power, maybe a couple of people for mutual support. The question was it worth the risk? She might lose 2 or 4 strong channelers right when they were most needed for no gain whatsoever. On the other hand, she might be able to bring new allies to the field. Later in the day, Taija heard a knock at her office door. At a call of "come in," it opened, and Alexei walked through, looking sheepish, trailed by the Aes Sedai whose ageless face Taija had last seen bent over his desk. She was all Aes Sedai haughtiness now, though, face composed and serene. Taija could do serene, too, especially when there was potential to wind someone up. "Alexei, good to see you. I've been wanting to speak to you, and you must be Alusha Gamies." "Taija, please, make yourselves comfortable. Let me get you something to drink. Tea." Taija didn't let Alexei get a word in, pulling a couple of chairs out with flows of air and spinning fire into her teapot. Thank you. Unlike Alexei, Alusha was pure serenity, sitting down as primly as anyone Taija had ever met. I have heard much of you. I am pleased to finally have the opportunity to meet you. Taija suppressed a smirk. Yes, it's nice to meet you too. She poured some tea into cups and handed them to the two of them. She should really behave herself with a tower, Aes Sedai, but on the other hand, I trust your journey to the hall was pleasant. Alexei has mentioned your proposals to me. She could see Alexei's worry growing as she very carefully kept a straight face. He knew her too well. Thank you, most pleasant. Light, she was such a tower, Aes Sedai, and Alexei had said she was different too. So, Alexei told me that you had a proposition that he had been negotiating with you. Taija paused for a moment, keeping it just short enough that they didn't have time to speak. I must admit, though, I hadn't imagined negotiations would be so vigorous. They both immediately flushed red. Made her wonder how old Alusha actually was, although then again, if she'd been caught like that, she'd have been blushing too, and she was nearly 200. Taija, Alexei was cut off by Alusha. Taija said, "I Oh, don't worry. You can call me Taija. No need for titles. Why, I think we're practically family now." She smiled brightly at them. Alusha let out a strangled sound, and Alexei put his head in his hands. Taija let things hang for a little longer, and then changed her tone to a more serious one. Embarrassment aside, Alexei, I'm sorry for walking into your office without knocking. However, you shouldn't be using it for trysts with Tower Eyes, said I, or anyone else for that matter. You have a room. Taja's mind went back to one particularly memorable incident with his dedicated ex. Or the old oak tree by the river, that too. He looked like he was trying to shrink into nothing. Perfect. Alusha, however, seemed to be made of sterner stuff. Stop this. It is none of your business what we do in our own time. Taija raised her eyebrows at her. Would you say that to Siwan if she caught you doing that in Lean's office? No, no need to answer that. Fine, though. If you want me to take this seriously rather than teasing you, then let's have a serious conversation. Obviously, Taija had no intention of letting it go with Alexei. It might be the best thing that had happened all month, but it was still a point she needed to make. You're coming to me with a proposal that involves careful negotiation between the hall and the tower, and will need my personal backing to persuade the tower it's a good idea, all to save a group of people I despise. Now I find out that you're lovers too. How can I trust anything I hear to be objective? I wouldn't let that twist my judgment, Taija, honestly. Alexei sounded both hurt and horrified at the idea. Alexei, I trust you as much as I trust anyone alive, but we've all had our heads turned by a beautiful woman or a handsome man. I really couldn't care less who you're banging as long as they're good to you. However, how do you know that Alusha hasn't just seduced you to get what she wants? Taija felt bad saying it, but it was a very real issue. She wouldn't. Really. Just because you like her. Or because she's Red Adger and so would be above sleeping with a mere Hall Eyes, said I. Taija turned her attention back to Alusha, who was blushing again, but somehow she also seemed to be getting more relaxed as Taija spoke. Easy enough to test. No weasel words, Alusha, just a straight answer. Would you seduce Alexei to get what you wanted? She smiled at that. Even Taija had to admit she was quite pretty when she smiled. It transformed her face. Yes, absolutely. What? There's a long silence as Taija and Alexei tried to process that. Alusha's smile widened. You have missed the obvious question, though. What's that? Did I seduce Alexei to help with my proposals? She paused. The answer to that is no, by the way. With those words, she leant back and shot him a smug smile. Taija gave her a look. Do you think this is somehow funny? Well, yes, do you not? Alusha had her there. After a moment, Taija turned her eyes to Alexei. Okay, Alexei, you're right. She's not like other tower eyes, said I. You can keep her for now. Just to be clear, that doesn't mean that her proposals are agreed, though. So let's talk about those. Keemlin Rand was in a foul mood. His visit to Gildan had gotten him what he'd wanted, but the fact that he'd had to send Mesma back to the borderlands and threaten to hang his followers had tainted its success. Why did so much of the world seem to be going mad? Well, what did you expect? The man was a lunatic, and your last battle is coming. Things are only going to become worse as the Dark One's touch grows stronger. Shut up, Luz Thurin. He directed the angry thought at the voice, and then returned to his brooding. Not this time. Do you even have any idea what you are doing? You're just muddling along like an idiot boy. If you don't have anything helpful to say, then go back to whatever hole you belong in after what you did to the world." Unfortunately, that time, his harsh words to the voice didn't drive it away. "Obviously, I know what you're trying to do. It will not work. I have said it before. I will say it again. I want to speak to Taija Kosola. Even if that happened, which it won't, you can't speak to her. You're a voice in my head, a difficulty that will be easily overcome with you to translate. You spend your days being as unpleasant as you can possibly be, and yet you think I'll help you speak to her. Blood and bloody ashes, the taint really did drive you mad. You know I am not mad, no more than you are. I only wish to speak to her for both our benefit. How does Taija put it in your language? Go fuck yourself. Very well, a deal. I shall restrain myself and will work to be more helpful for you. In return, you will let me speak with her." Chapter 168. It's a hard life being Goin Trackened. Chapter text interlude Roman 37. It's a hard life being Goin Trackened. Ever since he had returned from Tar Valon with Elada, Goin's life had been difficult. Their rescue by Ulthor had forced him to re-examine some of his thoughts about the dragon, as had the discovery that his mother was still alive, and was in fact allied with Ulthor. That thought made him shake his head as he walked down the corridors of the Trackened Summer Palace. He would likely have been in Keemlin if not for Taija having destroyed the one he grew up in. It was clear that he had been misled about the situation outside the White Tower. Well, his mother had made that clear to him. The disappointment in her face when she had summoned him for a talk about some of the things he had been saying had been painful. Not as painful as the angry and detailed way she had broken down his views. Still, that was in the past. What was causing him difficulty now was love, as it had been almost since he had reached Keemlin. Well, at least the illusion of love. He knocked on the doors to Elaine's rooms, and at the irritated-sounding invitation to enter opened them. "Elaine, it is such a beautiful day. I was hoping you would come riding with me to enjoy the sunshine." He had to admit this was a relatively desperate measure, but he was running out of ideas. Elaine gave him a look of abject displeasure before glancing at Matrim. Lord Matrim, he supposed now. At least they were sat a decent distance apart, although the lack of a chaperone spoke volumes. Goyne ignored Matrim, as he always tried to, and gave his sister his most winning smile. Unfortunately, her scowl did not waver. "Is there a particular reason you have chosen this moment to come ask me to ride, immediately after my return?" A lesser man would have quailed at her tone, but he had taken his oaths as the future first prince of the sword, and he would protect her, even from herself. "It is just so long since I have seen you and I have missed you, so I thought we could spend time together on such a nice day before you are called away again." Elaine hesitated, her scowl deepening, and then she sighed. "Yes, it has been some time." Goyne's heart leapt. Victory. He would have to do something nice for the servant who had reported Matrim's arrival to him. "Matt, I am sorry, but Goyne is right. I have duties to my family, too." The roguish boy sighed. "Of course, Elaine, I understand." He shot Goyne an unreadable look and stood up. "I suppose I'd better go and see to the troops. Elaine, would you mind making me a shortcut to the edge of the wards?" A moment later, a gateway rotated open in the room, and Matrim turned towards it. Then, before he could step through it, Elaine had flung her arms around him, pulling him close and delivering him a kiss that would have been thoroughly inappropriate in private, let alone in front of Goyne, before she whispered something in his ear. Goyne truly did not like the smile that appeared on Matrim's face as he stepped through the gateway. Then he was gone, and Goyne was alone with his foolish sister. It was most unfortunate the way that she thought she was in love with this boy, but Elaine was young and had always had her own ideas about the way things should be. He was surprised their mother had not put a stop to it, but he supposed that after her experiences and her own totally inappropriate new marriage, she might not feel able to do so. So it was left to him to try to keep Matrim's grasping hands off his sister, whatever she might think about the matter. Goyne had seen the way he looked at her, and he did not like it one bit. The way she was carrying on, she was going to end up with child and be forced into a completely unsuitable marriage, or more likely leap into it. Goyne was broken out of his reverie by Elaine's voice, suddenly turned sweet. "Shall we go, brother dearest?" He sighed. He had the feeling he was not going to enjoy this ride. Another gateway rotated open. Why, we could go straight to the stables after all. With traveling, I hardly need to walk between places. Goin suppressed a grimace. He was not sure what she was planning with this, but there was clearly a point coming. Of course, he gestured at the hole in the air. After you. Elaine primly stepped through, and as he followed her, he could not help but notice that her dress was rather more practical than those she used to wear. In the stables, Elaine ignored a groom's shout of surprise and allowed the gateway to close behind Goin. She paused and looked around and then turned back to him with a sweet smile. Thinking about it, perhaps I do not feel like riding. After all, with traveling, I can just move around as I will. Another hole in the air opened. Come, Goin. With a sigh, he followed her through it. She took a couple of steps, and another hole opened in the air. He looked through it to a filthy street in a dilapidated city. I do not think we should go there. It does not appear safe. Oh, come now. With you looking after me so well, I must be safe wherever I go. Or are you afraid? Elaine did not wait for a response, stepping straight through her gateway and out into the street, seemingly unmindful of the mud on her fine slippers. After a moment, Goin hurried after her. As soon as he was through the gateway, it closed, and she rounded on him. Now, we are going to have a nice long talk, and if you manage to give me the right answers, I might not even leave you here. We're even, are we? Coming after her might have been a mistake. Goin looked around, noting the damage to a number of the buildings, the group of hard-eyed men who were gazing at him with something between greed and hate. Of course you do not know, because you are incapable of looking beyond your own nose or working anything out for yourself. With a start, he realized Elaine was practically red with anger. What are you talking about? He felt his own anger rising. As usual, she just assumed the world worked the way she expected it to. Your constant attempts to keep me and Matt apart. I suppose it is some misguided attempt at protecting me. Why? Do you think me some kind of naive girl to be taken advantage of? Do you think I do not realize what you are doing? The way you pop up every time he comes to the palace, the interruptions from servants or soldiers whenever I visit him elsewhere in Keemlin or in the military camps. Do you think you know better than Mother, who has allowed our courtship? Goin winced slightly. He had not expected her to work out the interruptions when he was not around. There was only one thing to do, and it was something he had been wanting to do for a while anyway, go on the attack. Your courtship. You have been carrying on like some tavern girl who will drop everything for a cheeky grin and a bit of excitement. Matrim is utterly unsuitable, and if you were not so smitten with him, it would be clear to you too. Elaine stared at him for a second, and he thought she was going to shriek with frustration, but it seemed she had changed somewhat during his absence. Instead, she just replied with a cold voice, Goin, you really are a fool. If you cannot see Matt's positive qualities, then that is your problem, but at the moment you are making it my problem, and that I will not tolerate. Well, if you would just behave with some propriety. Before she had left the White Tower, Elaine would have stamped her foot in a rage at his words. Instead, she just scowled. Do you even think through whether what you are doing has any effect? You are such a boy. I can travel. If I want Matt in my rooms at night, then he is in my rooms without any interference from anyone. Unfortunately, Goin was distracted from his outraged retort by the hard-faced men advancing on them, hands on knives. His own hand went to his sword without thinking, and he half drew it. Oddly, their eyes were on Elaine, and one of them bowed low. Lady, is he bothering you? Say the word and you will not see him again. Goin was not used to being dismissed like that. He wanted to fully draw his sword, but that would be an unnecessary escalation. Still, how in the light did they think they could beat him? There were 4 of them, but he had a sword to their knives and was well on his way to being a blade master. Elaine ignored Goin too. Thank you, but no help is necessary. Oh, Lander, I did not recognize you at first. Thank you again, but I am just having a discussion with my brother and would appreciate some privacy. Please do give my regards to your wife and children, though. The men seemed to just fade away at those words, with bows and promises of loyalty. What in the light was that? Elaine gave him a deeply unimpressed look. Do you even know what happened in Ebu Dar? Yes, you were trapped in the city and had to hide from the Sintian, and were involved in the battle. Goin trailed off, that seemed to summarize it fairly well. Elaine gave him a long look and sighed. I suppose we can leave it at that. Then her voice hardened. I am an adult. I am Aes Sedai, and I am the daughter heir of Andor. Compared to what I, or Matt for that matter, have experienced, you are an unblooded boy who refuses to listen to reality. Rage shot through Gawain, but she continued speaking, rolling over his attempt at protesting. Our mother has not forbidden me from courting Matt. I do not wish to stop courting Matt, and regardless, my decisions in that regard are none of your business. You will stop interfering in my life, or you will find that my tolerance has its limits. Now, since you have ruined my afternoon with Matt, I am going to visit some of the people I fought with here. Was this Ebu Dar then? A gateway opened beside him. This will take you back to Keemlin. I will keep it open for the next 10 seconds. Otherwise, you can make your own way home, assuming you manage to leave the Rahad in one piece. Elaine, you are being childish. 5 seconds. 4, 3. With a growl of frustration, Gawain jumped through the gateway to find himself in a muddy field, Keemlin's walls just visible in the distance. Before he could turn and protest, the gateway closed behind him. A few days later, Gawain found himself in the Hall of Servants. One of the tasks he had taken on for his mother was monitoring the hall. It was more symbolic than holding any practical meaning, given the hall's power and the treaty signed with Andor giving it a great deal of autonomy. However, appearances did matter. His visits and those of the Queen's Guard, asserting Andor's rights over its territory, even parts of it granted autonomy, were important reminders that ultimately the hall was in Andor. It did not hurt that it also gave him the chance to see Egwene and occasionally exchange a few words with her. Now she would make an appropriate match for him, far more mature than his sister, a strong channeler with a prominent position in the hall. She was also determined and beautiful. It would even have political benefits, helping to bind the hall's leadership with Andor's. Perhaps this time he would ask her if she would like to go walking with him. That could help to make up for the foul mood he had been in since the last time he had seen Elaine. Unfortunately, on this visit, as with other recent ones, he did not get the chance to speak to her. This time she was busy speaking to a tall redhead, presumably one of the Ael who was studying at the hall. With a sigh, Gawain went about his duties. It seemed that he would not get any enjoyment out of this either. Alexi spun a gateway to Tar Valon and stepped through it, a slight spring in his step. Of course he was going to see Alusha again. Discussions with her had been intriguing. It was strange to think that a member of the Red Adger could be so perceptive or so amusing. Half the time he could see her struggling to overcome the decades of prejudice that had been instilled in her. The other half she was fascinating. He'd have to take her proposals back to Taija after this visit. They'd fleshed them out enough now that there was something practical to discuss, and he did think that it was a good idea. Taija supported cooperation with the White Tower after all, and this certainly counted for that. It was a pleasant walk through Tar Valon streets, as ever, and the greeting he received at the White Tower was faultlessly polite. It didn't take long for Alusha to come down to collect him, all Aes Sedai serenity, and then sweep him back up the reception room at the front of the rooms that she maintained in the White Tower. What he now knew were the Red Adger quarters were virtually empty whenever she led him through them. Hardly surprising given the numbers of remaining Reds, although apparently those outside the tower had been summoned back and were trickling in. Once they were inside her rooms, Alusha changed completely. The serene Aes Sedai was gone. Instead, there was the enthusiastic woman he'd been getting to know. So, I have been plotting out how this might work from an organizational perspective, so that we can salve the huge egos that no doubt reside in the hall and would not accept the obviously justified leadership of the experienced members of the Red Adger. Alexi raised an eyebrow, and she grinned at him. She really wasn't like the other Tower Aes Sedai. Don't you think you're getting ahead of yourself? We haven't even got an agreement in principle from Taija or any of your Adger, let alone the Amulin. Nonsense. There is no point in presenting a half-cooked plan to them. If everything is in its proper place, then surely they'll accept the plan. Alexi's eyebrows rose higher. You were never particularly politically powerful in the Red Adger, were you? He wanted to take the words back as soon as Alusha's Aes Sedai mask slipped back over her face. Then she sighed and slumped slightly. Not really. I left the tower at the first opportunity and have largely resisted any attempts at persuading me to return until recent events. I did not always get on with my fellow Aes Sedai. You're not really like the other Tower Aes Sedai I've met. Oh, that's just with you. With that airy declaration, Alusha returned to her plans. What we would need is eyes and ears around the world. Just with me. She blinked. Yes, well, obviously. How far do you think I would have survived as an Aes Sedai if I was like this with everyone? Anyway, however, Alexei was not going to drop the matter. All right, but why me? Alusha laughed. She did have a lovely laugh. How do you think you would have reacted if I had approached you like a typical Aes Sedai? Not so positively, I am sure. I have researched the hall. I understand at least some of how you are different to the White Tower. If I am to succeed, then I must adapt my approach, no. Alexei laughed. He thought he was getting better at spotting her rather odd sense of humor. Really? So it's just more manipulation. Make the poor ignorant men dance to your tune. That would seem a logical conclusion. Alusha's smile widened into a grin. Now, while we are on the subject of making poor ignorant men dance to the tune of an Aes Sedai, there was actually something else I wished to discuss with you. Galad effortlessly deflected the flurry of blows from the man, almost seeming to slide between them before flicking his own practiced sword out to place it at his throat. Good, you are getting better, but you need to keep your focus better. Remember your forms. After clapping the man on the back, he turned towards his belongings. This was thirsty work, and he needed some water before his next bout. He drank with satisfaction. Since his escape from the White Tower with Goyne, life had been good. The news that Queen Morghese was alive had been more than joyous. He had been especially happy for Goyne. It had been terrible seeing him think that he had lost his mother. Being able to see Elaine again had been a great pleasure too, however she might have felt about it. Although, actually, recently she had been far friendlier to him. Now he was teaching the sword to the more talented of the Andorran soldiers, and it pleased him. He could make himself useful, provide a real contribution towards Andor in the last battle, and be close to his family, ready to serve. Truly, the only thing that saddened him was Goyne's concern, no obsession, with Elaine and Matrim Cawthon. Elaine was an adult, and Queen Morghese had not expressed disapproval of the match. That was all that he needed to hold himself back from interfering. He could see why Goyne was concerned. Elaine could be hot-headed. The way she reacted to him illustrated that, and Matrim was certainly rough around the edges. However, Matrim was also very clearly a leader of men, destined for greatness despite his occasionally childish attitude, and also clearly devoted to his sister. That was enough for Galad. She could make better matches, but she could also no doubt make far worse. Chapter 169, Little Sister. Chapter text, Chapter CXXX, Little Sister. A few days after Taija's interesting meeting with Alexei and Alusha, she was approached by an aspirant holding an envelope. He gave her a low bow and handed it to her. A message from Rand Sedai, Taija Sedai. He told me to put it straight into your hands and no one else's. Thank you, she muttered, already breaking the seal on the envelope. Taija quickly scanned the contents, her brow furrowing in puzzlement at what she saw. It was odd. He wanted a private meeting tomorrow, but in particular he didn't want to see Tell. It was doubly odd, because he was very clear in the letter that Tell hadn't done anything to trigger that kind of reaction, and that he wasn't in trouble. There were just reasons. Very weird. As far as she knew, they got on fine. Still, she trusted Rand. If he wanted to meet her alone, then she'd do him the courtesy. She was still going to tell Tell what she was doing, though. Not because she was particularly worried, but because she didn't like hiding things from him. If she asked him to keep away, he'd keep away. Taija had the feeling that whatever Rand had to say, she wasn't going to like it too, so she wanted Tell to be on standby for comforting duties afterwards. Her mind went to what sort of horrible things Rand might say that he wouldn't want anyone else to hear. Could it be something about the last battle? She'd been thinking about that, trying to work out what he could do there. She'd read the prophecies, of course she had. She'd also read some of the interpretations of them. Everyone seemed pretty clear that they meant Rand would need to die to defeat the Dark One. Well, fuck that. Firstly, it was completely useless for telling him how to actually beat the Dark One. Secondly, she couldn't care less for prophecies, or how they were interpreted. Whatever happened, people would say that they'd been fulfilled. Worst case, he could just cut himself, so he bled a little on Shale Gull or something. He'd better not be summoning her, so he could tell her how he planned to commit suicide for the world. With a start, Taija realized she'd just been standing there inventing a conversation she was going to have with Rand when she got no idea what he actually wanted to talk about. After a quick, guilty look around to see if anyone was watching her, she hurried off to the class she was meant to be teaching. I've done as you asked, so are you going to be less disagreeable? More helpful? Rand wasn't sure why he muttered the words out loud. Luz Thurin seemed to be able to hear his thoughts perfectly well. He winced at that. The last thing he wanted to do was to start having these conversations out loud in front of Cadsuane, or possible worse. Minwell, your girl is no Ileana. Luz Thurin sounded smug, and then suddenly horrified at his own words. Light damn me, I deserve every bit of suffering the Creator has seen fit to inflict on me. So Luz Thurin was already breaking their bargain. Hardly a surprise. Rand wished he could say he hadn't expected it. He half thought the man was still mad. He'd have to find some excuse for why he'd summoned Taija, since he wasn't going to allow Luz Thurin to behave like that. No, my apologies. I will, it is difficult. The memories, everything I have done, being stuck in your head. Not that there is anything wrong with your head. Luz Thurin sounded almost panicked. Perhaps he might actually try to be useful after all. Yes, the Forsaken. What do you know of them? What has Taija Kosola told you? Which of my memories have you stolen? We will discuss them, and then we shall talk of how you will unite the rest of the world. But not Samil. I do not want to talk about Samil. I have nothing to say about him. Taija was lying in bed with Tell, snuggled against his chest, when she gave voice to her musings about the rest of the world. You know, I've been asking about Shara and the land of madmen. Had he fallen asleep? So I was thinking that maybe we should send someone to each of them to have a look, just to see if there's any point in trying to form alliances with them. The Dark One must be affecting them too, right? He was definitely half asleep. I thought maybe I'd send Egwene and Yer to the land of madmen. They make such a sweet couple, and he's hard as nails, and she's pretty tricksy, but can put on a good face. She can do the diplomacy, and he can make sure she survives. Yes, Egwene and Yer. Taija resisted the urge to poke him. He'd been working too hard and needed his rest. So did she really, but she wanted to get this idea off her chest. They're good together. I really didn't see that coming, but it's just so funny when she tries to take charge, and then he just decides he's not doing it for some dedicated reason. I wonder if they'll last. Anyway, they'll do for the land of madmen. We might have to get help from the sea folk to get them there, though. I'm not sure how good the maps are. As for Shara, well, perhaps Jahar and Elaine could go. Tell jerked violently. No, absolutely not. It's far too dangerous. Oh, you're awake after all. I thought you were asleep. Taija propped herself up on her elbows and looked down at him just in time to get one of his more unimpressed looks. You're cute when you do that. She planted a kiss on his forehead and then laid her head back on him. I know you said they're hostile to outsiders, but frankly, the dedicated and sea folk are weird, so it's not surprising. Surely we can send a couple of strong Aes Sedai, and they'll be able to handle themselves to see whether the stories are true or not. He sighed. Look, Taija, I know that you can't believe everything people in this time say, but in this case it's true. Shara is hostile and it's dangerous. It was part of what they told me in the... She knew what he didn't want to mention, and she didn't really want him to either. The Sharons are actually run by their channelers. I'm not totally sure on the system, but if there's anywhere where they could overwhelm two strong Aes Sedai, it's there, and everything I've heard says that they'd never even get the chance to say their piece. He really did sound serious. Light she hated this time. Why couldn't this be a conversation about whether to go on holiday to Mjin or not? Fine. No Shara. I still want to find out about the land of madmen, though. Alexei stared Alusha in the eyes, distinctly unimpressed. For someone who insists that she didn't seduce me to get her way, you seem determined to do your best to distract me whenever we're talking about the proposals. She gave him a completely unperturbed smile and leant back so that her cleavage was no longer exposed. Do try to stop thinking with your manhood and start thinking with your brain. We have a lot to do today. Alexei resisted the urge to growl with frustration, strong as it was. Fine. So, as I was saying, if we want this to be successful, we need to limit the range of actions that will be taken. We don't want to be seen as interfering with local laws, or for the tower or hall to be treading on each other's own rules. Indeed, so murder, compulsion, attempts at taking over nations, those seem like the obvious starting points. Alexei nodded. I think compulsion especially is something where we can show the value of our idea. Rand had a slight tremble in his hands as he looked at Min's beautiful, concerned face. One thing had been clear to him, whatever Lew Thurin had to say on the matter. He couldn't tell Taija about the voice in his head without telling the woman he loved first. Min, we need to talk. There's something I need to tell you. A frown marred her forehead at that. At least Lew's Thurin generally vanished whenever Min was around. Rand suspected it reminded the man too much of what he'd done to his own love. It's something I should have told you a while ago, but it's just difficult. Min put a hand on his arm and gave it a squeeze. More difficult than being the dragon reborn. Ha! Rand barked a quickly cut-off laugh. No, maybe. I don't know. Before the taint was cleansed, I'd started having bursts of knowledge and behavior that weren't me, knowing things I shouldn't. I didn't know for sure, but obviously I assumed it was the madness. But the taint's gone. I know. Believe me, I know. Anyway, Nynaeve's checked me more than once. She thinks she can detect the madness, and I'm not mad. But Rand's heart wrenched at the worry on Min's face. At least it wasn't disgust, not that he'd ever expect that from Min of all people. I've been hearing a voice in my head, more and more over time. It talks to me, comments on what's going on, and it knows things. Things I could never know. He took a breath and continued. I'm almost entirely sure it's Lews Thurin. Min looked at him for a second. You think you have Lews Thurin's voice in your head, but you're not mad. Rand nodded. Blood and bloody ashes. Why didn't you tell me before, you wool-headed lunk? She punched his arm hard. A little bit of tension that Rand hadn't even realized was there left him at those words. It's not something that's easy to talk about. I wasn't even sure it was real, or that it wasn't just the madness. Then, being who I am, what I am, would you really want to tell anyone? It's taken me a long time to even accept that the voice is real and that it actually is Lew Thurin. Can you hear him now? No. Rand shook his head. He vanishes whenever you're around. I think love reminds him of what he did, why he's called the Kinslayer. He's not mad. I don't think so anyway, but he's an unpleasant, broken man. I suppose any of us would be after all that. Sometimes he's helpful, but mostly he's just insulting or critical. Oh, Rand. Min enveloped him in a long hug. Eventually she pulled away. So you're going to be speaking to Taija about this? Rand jumped. How did you know? That got him a raised eyebrow. You best keep it in mind that I'm no fool. Something had to trigger you coming to tell me now, and who's better to speak to about the voice from the age of legends in your head than the woman from that time? Am I right? Yes, you're right. You're far too clever. Min gave him a smug look, and then seriousness returned to her face. Next time, though, just tell me. I know I should have. It was just, I know. Nothing's easy when you're you. No. You really don't mind that I'm going to talk to Taija? No, it's fine. She makes me uncomfortable, but I know it's not rational. I just feel wrong with the way there are no visions at all around her, but that's my stupid power, not my thinking mind. Normally, I'd rather not be seeing visions. Anyway, she cares about you. There aren't many other people who won't try to use you, but I know she's one. Min took a deep breath. Do you want me to come with you when you speak to her? Rand quickly shook his head. No, thank you, but I can manage this by myself, and Lews Thurin might not even appear if you're there. He didn't miss the way Min relaxed slightly at that. All right, but don't be stupid about it. If you want me, I'm there. Now what are you going to say to her? Taija stepped out of her gateway outside Keemlin and headed into the city. The guards on the gates glanced at her and then looked away. She got little more attention from most of the people milling through the streets. The fact that she was wearing trousers instead of a dress probably drew more attention than anything else. No one recognized the small, unassuming-looking woman as the head of the Hall of Servants. Just how she liked it, really. It took her a little while to reach the palace Rand had taken over. Some witty aspirant at the hall had called it the Dragon's Den, and that was the name that had stuck, at least among members of the hall. There she was definitely recognized. The dedicated at the gates welcomed her in. Given everything she'd seen in the Turangreal in Ruidian, Taija still thought the level of respect they gave her as an Aes Sedai was ridiculous. The Aes Sedai who gave the dedicated their orders should have been on their knees begging them for forgiveness, but that wasn't something she had time to worry about right then. The aspirants backing up the dedicated as guards gave her a low bow and then hit her with a slicing web. Once she was past them, Taija quickly reapplied the webs, concealing her channeling. Then it was on to Rand, led by a slightly nervous servant. She was taken to a small but luxurious reception room and shown in. As she entered, Rand got up from his chair. Taija, it's good to see you. It's been too long. Rand. Taija smiled and went over to give him a hug. He felt tense but still returned it. It was another reminder that this wasn't the boy she'd spent hours talking to about the world, identity, and his future. Please, have a seat. That seemed to exhaust Rand's desire for conversation. Instead, once she'd sat down, there was just an awkward silence extending longer and longer. He was really uncomfortable about something. That much was more than clear. Eventually, Taija broke the silence. Is everything all right, Rand? He hesitated and then let out a long sigh. There's no way to say this easily. I've got Luz Thurin's voice in my head. What? I said. Yes, I heard what you said, I'm just. Taija embraced Sedar, drawing as much as she could. Was Nynaeve busy? How fast could she get her over here? She could send one of the aspirants while she kept an eye on Rand. Taija chose her words carefully, keeping her voice gentle. What exactly makes you think you're hearing Luz Thurin's voice? She could feel his annoyance despite your attempt at keeping disbelief out of her tone. She needed to be very careful what she said. Rand was hardly imperceptive these days. He was far more powerful than her, and she knew he had a stronger angriel too. You don't believe me. Of course you don't. Why would you? It's madness. I'm only telling you this because he's insisting on it. All right, Rand, but why do you think it's Luz Thurin's voice? Taija glanced at the door. How fast could she reach it? Probably not fast enough. Because it is. He seemed distracted for a second. All right, fine. Maybe I can convince you. Let me see. He looked away for a moment, and then when he spoke again, his voice was different. Maybe this will help convince you, little sister. The first time we met was at a reception at the Hall of Servants. You had just received your first name. You stammered when you introduced yourself and then ended up spilling your drink. What? Rand, you don't know that. You can't know that. Taija's voice was weak. Then her outrage caught up. Also, what the fuck? Little sister, fuck right off whether you're Luz Thurin or Rand. She was absolutely not going to accept that affectionate diminutive here. She might have been able to call Egwene or Elaine that in her time, given their close relationship and relative seniority, but whether it was from a 20-year-old she'd mentored or an older, senior Aes Sedai, she barely knew it was completely inappropriate now. Rand gave himself a shake and returned to his own language. I was repeating what Luz Thurin said. I know it sounds mad, but how could I have known that? You know, I can't speak the old tongue like that. Taija stared at him for a second before getting herself back under control. That was a perfect Perrin Disen accent, it's true. You don't speak the old tongue that well. No one from this time does. Probably her least favorite accent, too, unless it was Tell speaking he was allowed. Did Tell tell you about that? She must have told him that story at some point. Something passed over Rand's face at Tell's name. Please don't mention Tell, it upsets Luz Thurin, but no, he didn't tell me anything. This is how I know it's actually Luz Thurin. He just knows things that there's no way I could possibly know. If you say so. Taija struggled to keep the skepticism out of her voice, although at that point it was hardly the strangest thing to have ever happened. Fine. Jal Damajin was removed from the Grand Council about 1 year into the war. Why? His name was not Jal Damajin, it was Bal Marengin. The public reason for his removal was that he was found to be in possession of indecent images of children. The real reason for his removal was that he was on the verge of defecting to the Shadow, and we planted the images on his computer's hard drive. Shock ran through Taija. There was no way Rand could have known that. She didn't think he even knew what a hard drive was. Tell could have told him, she supposed, but the chances that they ever discussed an obscure political scandal was zero. Then her mind caught up with the second part of what Rand had said. Wait, you framed him. For child pornography. What the actual fuck? Rand somehow managed to convey Luz Thurin's dismissive tone while fluently speaking a language he hardly knew. It was that or have yet another of the chosen to deal with. Some of us had to actually make sacrifices during the war, you know. Rage shot through Taija, but she beat it down. She wasn't going to be provoked. Is he always like this? She switched back to Rand's language, restraining her urge to say something deeply intemperate. Also, how are you even doing this? Can you understand him? Rand grimaced. I understand him fine, and yes, he seems to insist on being unpleasant. He hesitated. He says if we'd suffered what he had and were stuck in someone's head, we'd be unpleasant too. I've told him if he can't be civil to you, then I'm not going to speak for him. So it's you speaking, not him. Yes. Rand still looked uncomfortable. I can sort of repeat what he's saying, but it's still me. I can stop or change it, although I'd struggle with the old tongue, even if I do understand what you're both saying. It was interesting that he could understand. Unless he'd been doing a lot more studying, he should have been struggling to follow. And Luz Thurin doesn't have any control over this. It was a shock, but Taija realized she was accepting that this actually was Luz Thurin. No, or I don't think so. He's complained about it before, but I think I'd have to decide to let him have control, and there's no way I'm doing that. Well, that was a relief. She wasn't letting go of Sedar regardless, not that she thought she'd have the slightest chance against Luz Thurin if he did somehow take control. In hindsight, she should have brought a sangreal with her. Maybe she should just carry one as a matter of course, but then that would leave the hall less well defended. All right. Said you were telling me because Luz Thurin was insisting on it. So what does he want? I want to speak to you about how the war ended. Rand shuddered. Whether it was carrying over Luz Thurin's feelings or simply in sympathy, Taija couldn't tell. Are you aware of what happened? She bit her bottom lip. The later stages of the war were really not something she liked thinking about. The bits she'd lived through were bad enough. This might be important, though, if it wasn't the tortured fantasies of a madman. I know the gist of it. You went with a group of men and tried to seal the bore. You succeeded, creating 7 seals, most of which are now broken, but somehow the Dark One tainted Sedin in the process, and the rest is history. Close enough, little sister. Taija cut him off. Are you trying to provoke me? Should I insist on formal titles? Or did you just bring me here to patronize me? He ignored her words. Do you know about Latra Parsi and the disagreement between the men and women? Taija decided to let his disrespect go. The fateful conquered. She'd at least done her reading. Maybe. I don't really trust the records from this time. It wasn't something she discussed with Tell either. That period was not a topic of conversation that either of them wants to open up. Surprisingly wise of you. He hadn't been this much of a prick in her time, had he? Tell knew him much better than her, but even Tell's occasional rants had never mentioned anything like this kind of rudeness. It was not called that in our time, but there is much truth to the matter. Latrapasi convinced the female Aes Sedai not to assist with sealing the bore. She no doubt thought she had her reasons, but you know what the end result was. Typical of the woman, so conservative that she would have supported cryogenically freezing ourselves to avoid anything ever changing. Without Sedar involved, the Dark One tainted Sedin, and here we are. Well, Latrapasi seemed to be one person where Luz Thurin, Taija and Tell all had similar opinions. All right, hearing about the death of everything I loved isn't particularly appealing, but you must have a reason for this beyond patronizing me. Indeed. Do you know what Latrapasi's plan for winning the war was? No idea. That wasn't really true, but she wanted to hear Luz Thurin's view. The Choden Cal. They were meant to be the ultimate super weapon, but the access keys were lost. Although, of course, young Rand has them now. Rand twitched at being called young. Well, great. He can reenact Latrapasi's plan instead. It can't be any worse than yours after all. Did having Samuels? Rand stopped talking, a furious expression on his face. I'm sorry, Taija. I'm not repeating what he just said. Absolutely not. I think this was a mistake. At that name, Taija's face had lost all expression. No, I want to hear what Luz Thurin was going to say. He clearly has something he wants to get out there. He would never have been so rude or patronizing to me in our time. Rand shook his head. Taija, really, I don't want to. Please, Rand, I want to get this over with, and then we can figure a way to get him out of your head. He shook his head again, so she pinned him with her harshest stare. I know it's not you, Rand. Just say it. After a moment, he sighed. He said, I knew you were at best one step removed from being a traitor, but did having Samuel's prick thrust into you also crowd out what little common sense you possessed? I'm sorry. Taija sat in stunned silence for a moment, and then her bubbling anger exploded. You know what, Luz Thurin? Fuck you. You're in no position to judge me. You led the Light's forces to defeat. You broke the world. I've been stuck here in this shitty time clearing up the mess that you left behind. They call you the Kinslayer because your legacy is the broken bodies of Ileana and your children. Only that's the least of what you did. You sit there, smugly insulting me over things that you weren't there for. Contrary to what you seem to think, I'm not an idiot. I'm just already sick of your bullshit within a couple of minutes of speaking to you. Now, if you can't say something productive, then you can go die on a scree slope. You're not the leader of the Light anymore. You're just a sad, pathetic voice in a real leader's head. A voice that jerks off to his little fantasies of relevance while insulting the people who are actually trying to improve the world. So you'd better come out with something useful in the next few seconds, or else I'm going to find a way to get you out of Rand's head, even if I have to fucking well hunt down Greendel and compel her to do it. Rand blinks, took a step back from Taija's vehement outburst. Very well, little sister, she cut loose Thurin off. If you call me that one more time, this conversation is over. I am the first among servants, rebuilding the organization that was destroyed because of you. You can treat me with respect or not at all. Very well, Taija Kosola. You have made your position clear. He wasn't even apologizing, bastard. My point was going to be that had Latra Parsi's plan been followed, the outcome would have been the same. Using the Choden Cal would not have prevented the taint from touching Sedin. Taija forced her anger down. She could be furious later. For now, she needed to engage with this. All right, but if you had been able to use Sedar as well as Sedin, what exactly was it that you did to seal the bore? I can explain in more detail. I expect I will have to. However, in summary, we used a Drimstoff array combined with Karantian formulae-based webs with each of the seals. The men provided a pseudolink. I believe you have seen the Cinchen using something similar for anti-traveling wards. I adapted the webs to tailor the array myself and added a number of things, but in hindsight, it was fundamentally flawed. Sedin could not touch the essence of the Dark One without being tainted. All right, that sort of made sense. Taija wasn't sure she could replicate a Drimstoff array. It was deep into arcane warding webs, but she at least knew roughly what one was. And if Sedar was part of it too, she thought she already knew the answer to that question, but she had to ask it. It would have been tainted too. Are you sure? As sure as a disembodied voice can be. I have had some time to think on it. Was that a joke? He could fuck off after everything else he'd said. Right, so the power cannot touch the essence of the Dark One without being tainted. So what's the plan for the last battle? Would you believe that while you have been twiddling your thumbs at your new hall of servants, the idiot boy's entire plan has been to try to work it out as he went along, take the Choden Cal and try to replicate what I did, but with Sedar added in, and then see what happens. Taija ignored Rand's outraged squawk. So the Choden Cal are functional again, certainly in the near future. And Rand has no plan. He is convinced he needs to die to fulfill the prophecies, and that his death and the power will reseal the bore. For fuck's sake. She'd thought that she'd hammered all the prophecy crap out of Rand's head. Really? Really? Fucking teenagers, 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds, whatever. Well, that's absolutely not happening. Even if he believes in trying to follow prophecies, the wording isn't even clear. It just says he need to bleeds on Shael Gull and make some sacrifice. Nothing about dying. Fucking hell, Cadswain had better not have been feeding him these idiotic ideas. At least he decided not to take Kalendor instead of the Choden Cal because of that reference to a blade of light. Rand looked down awkwardly. I've been planning to ask you and Alexei to use the Choden Cal while I used Kalendor. Then I could die at the end. For fuck's sake. With no plan. Just hoping you could replicate what Luz Thurin did. Fuck. All right, Luz Thurin, you clearly have a reason to be talking to me beyond just wanting me to be a voice of reason. So what is it? Taija's mind was already racing, trying to work out what he might have in mind. Oh, that was it. It must be. You want me to? He cut her off. As you so aptly put it, you have been clearing up my mess. What was your greatest achievement in this time? Whatever my views on your personal choices, I do not doubt your skills as a scientist. You want me to adapt my taint destruction web to protect a new seal on the bore. Shit. Was that even possible? I can't test it, because I can't touch the Dark One safely with Sedar. I can't even go near Shael Gull safely. I also have no idea how to tie it into whatever you or Rand is planning to do to reseal the bore. You do realize how difficult that would be, right? I would say I have every confidence in you, but it would be an unconvincing lie. I will say that we have no other choice, unless you want to rely on the strength of the Choden Cal to overcome any counterstroke from the Dark One. I would hardly care. I am already dead and have no loved ones left to kill. Like you really are a prick. Taija muttered the words, but didn't regret them in the slightest. Right, Rand, I don't want to speak to him anymore. I don't know if you can get rid of him temporarily, but I want to talk to you, a proper heart-to-heart. One thing was for sure, she wasn't going to accept Rand dying to fulfill some stupid prophecy. Moradin sat back in the fine leather armchair, a glass of wine in hand, and Tsar running across his eyes. Everything was going according to plan. The dragon would survive to face the great lord, and then he would just need to make the correct choice, and this could all end. Moradin would not sully himself with the petty actions of the rest of the chosen. He did not need to scrub around in the dirt in the vain hope of advancement. No. He would continue to watch and wait, and just apply precise pressure where, and when it was needed to ensure that young Rand came to the pit of doom at the appointed time. Chapter 170, The Land of Madmen. Chapter CXXXI, The Land of Madmen. I know you don't want to hear it, but Luz Thurin has every right to be uncomfortable with you being with me. You're right, but I still don't want to hear it. Taija scowled at Tell, and he sighed deeply. There are no excuses, and I certainly don't deserve the forgiveness you or anyone else has shown me. Her scowl deepened. I said I don't want to hear it. Fine, fine. Tell held his hands up in front of him. So let's talk about what he said. He wants you to figure out a new web. She nodded. Yes, I'm not sure I can, but he seems to be thinking about an improved version of whatever it is he did to seal the bore the first time round. Doesn't that risk tainting both Sedin and Sedar? Well, yes, that's his concern, and that's why he wants me looking at the problem. The big problem is, I've got no idea whether I can do it. Light, I don't even know enough about warding to start thinking about what he even did. Tell gave her thigh a squeeze. Well, maybe I can help there. At least a bit. I was never in Luz Thurin's league, but I can give you the basic Sedin patterns to work with. A few days later, Tell was off doing military things with Rand's army. That was good. It means there were no distractions for Taija. It also meant she could take all the cushions off the chairs and bed in her room and turn them into a nest. She needed to do some really deep thinking. With a suitable set of webs spun around her room and orders not to disturb her given, she settled back into the soft embrace of the pile of cushions she'd made and started to work. Her taint destruction web did exactly what it was meant to, but it was a stand-alone web that needed Sedin to be channeled into it. From what Luz Thurin had said, sealing the bore required touching the Dark One, whatever he was made of, with Sedin, and that was how the taint affected Sedin. She couldn't just apply her taint-cleansing web to the Dark One. Even assuming that was physically possible, it would burst like a bubble under the kind of pressure that it would likely face. There was a finite amount of taint on Sedin. That was a fact. Presumably, spinning the seals around the Dark One involved touching him for a limited amount of time, and that then led to a fixed amount of contamination. Alternatively, he deliberately struck back, forcing his contamination onto Sedin, but could only get a limited amount onto it in the time that it was actively being channeled around him. Taija had to assume that that was the case, that the full force of the Dark One couldn't be applied to taint Sedin all of the time, or else the taint would be returning now while the seals still held. So, it had to be that the power could be tainted while it was being actively channeled into the seals, but not once they were in place. Fine. But then there was the other side of that equation. The Dark One had clearly been working away at the seals for the last 3,000 years. Buying the world another 3,000 years would be great, if she could avoid tainting both Sedin and Sedar. But ultimately, it just put the world back where it was with just long enough for people to forget to be afraid of the Dark One. So what she needed was a web that would allow Sedin and Sedar to touch the bore without being tainted, and then also prevent the Dark One from grinding away at the web sealing him in place. How the fuck she was meant to come up with something like that she didn't know. Still, she had to try. She couldn't just step back and let the world be broken again, because she couldn't come up with anything, and Rand decided to leap dick first into replicating Luz Thurin's plan from last time. Taija was going to need something that could interact safely with a ward array. She was also going to need something that could be directly touched by the Dark One without simply bursting or carrying his taint through to the power. Her experimentation with Tell had been helpful, but it was a tiny step on a long road. Tentatively, she shaped the outline of a web in the air in front of her. Light only knew how she was meant to work on this when you didn't even have a live example to train with. Ready. Egwene raised her eyebrows at Yer as he hefted his pack. She was learning to tolerate his foibles, but really it would be much simpler if he was willing to use a pack horse like her. Always, shade of my heart. For such a stoic man, he really could be very sweet. Let's go then. She took one last glance at the sea folk map and spun an inverted gateway. Time to go to this land of madmen, although frankly she did wonder whether it was Taija that was the mad one, sending them there. She gave the hole in the air a dubious look, and then tugged on her horse's reins and stepped through onto the skimming platform. With no more than a map to help, all she could do was choose a location to emerge that should be far enough into the continent to account for any mapping errors, and then hope for the best. At least she would be able to see their destination when she opened the gateway at the other end, so they wouldn't just be dropped into the sea. After a long journey in the empty black of the space between worlds, the two of them emerged into warm forest. Luscious trees grew high above them, and the air was heavy with humidity. All around they could hear the calls of animals. Egwene carefully looked around, but of course Yer was already moving, tugging on her arm to pull her closer to a tree, his eyes seeming to scan everywhere at once, his head never stopping moving. After a minute, he relaxed ever so slightly. There wasn't much sign of it, but she was starting to be able to tell with him. I believe we are alone, although it is hard to tell. This is as far from the threefold land as anything I have seen. Egwene gave him a smile. Good, at least we haven't been attacked as soon as we stepped out of the gateway. I suppose the first thing we should do is get ourselves out of this forest. It will be too easy to ambush us here, and we are less likely to see anyone. Now, what was the best way of doing this? She had no idea of her destination. She couldn't just travel out of there, and the trees meant that her line of sight was almost non-existent. She could skim again, but that would present its own risks. Perhaps if we just go in jumps of 5 miles southwards, Rand sat on the ornate chair, a throne really, as the emissary from the White Cloaks bowed before him, watched suspiciously by the maidens guarding the room. He didn't kneel, which Rand wouldn't normally have minded, but he was very conscious of the potential insult in this case, given who it was in front of him. You have a message from Pedron Nile. He kept his words short. These people were not his allies. Lord Rand, I do. The man struggled to conceal his distaste as he pulled a letter from his coat and began to read. The Lord Captain Commander of the Children of the Light sends his cordial greetings to Lord Randall Thor. The Children of the Light have opposed you up to this date as part of our service to the light. However, the signs are clear and the prophecies have been fulfilled. The Children of the Light, now and always, remain dedicated to defeating the shadow, wherever it may sit, above all other goals. The last battle is coming, and the Children of the Light are not willing to stand by the sidelines and watch the light be extinguished. As such, the Lord Captain Commander is willing to offer an alliance with the forces of the dragon. The Children of the Light shall fight at his side in the last battle. Rand blinked in surprise. Cadsuane and Aviesh, the Hall's current representative in his court, would be listening in from the next room. It had seemed unnecessarily provocative to have them visible for this talk, but he could imagine they would look shocked too. Well, Aviesh would anyway. Cadsuane's facial expression probably wouldn't change if Pedron Nile himself danced naked into the room. Rand forced his attention back on the man in front of him. An alliance. The man nodded, his unhappiness with the idea clear on his face. Indeed, the Children of the Light could not, swear allegiance to you or to any other. We serve only the light. However, until the last battle has been completed, we are willing to make accommodations. And the Children of the Light are supportive of your Lord Captain Commander's decision. The man looked even more uncomfortable. There have been some readjustments among the leadership. We are willing to work for the good of the light. So they have had a purge. And there was Luz Thurin. Even a couple of weeks after his talk with Taija, Rand was still thoroughly annoyed with the man for his behavior with her, not to mention his own rudeness about Rand. He knew they would need to speak again soon. That much was blindingly obvious, but he wasn't looking forward to it. Risky, they may turn on you. I know little of these Children of the Light, but they sound like fanatics. That ridiculous prophet of yours was harmful to your cause, even though he thought you stood next to the Creator. These ones are fanatics without the worship of you. They will stab you in the back, or the front for that matter, for their delusions without the slightest hesitation. However, you will need every man you can get when you face the shadow. Infighting helped to doom the light in my time. I see. He would need to discuss this with his advisors, but there would be little harm in opening negotiations. Another army of trained fighting men, under one of the great captains too, was not something he would casually throw away. You may inform the Lord Captain Commander that I will be happy to open discussions on our alliance. I do not require allegiance to me, only to the light, which we all serve. He hardened his voice for the last words. It helped to remind the White Cloak emissary of what might happen if Rand decided they did not serve the light. Fortuona watched, triumph swelling within her, as the High Lord Carline was dragged away to face his fate in the Tower of Ravens. The Cincian Empire was close to reunited. With long practice, she suppressed the burst of anger at the thought of the Westlands and what they had done to Cincian. Once they had destroyed the Imperial Palace, civil war had been likely. With the peace treaty that she had signed with them, civil war became an inevitability. However, rebellions were nothing new to her and her family. This might have been worse than most, but it was simply another in a long line. She knew how to deal with them, and her victory had been inevitable. However, now that she had achieved victory, she needed to turn her mind to other things. Being empress meant her word was law, but she had responsibilities too. Cincian had been devastated by the battles running across it. She needed to rebuild, to ensure that the good, honest subjects of the Crystal Throne were able to live life once more. Prosperity and safety were the backbone of imperial power. There were other concerns too. The Westlands, ruled by Merethdamine and in rebellion against Hawkwing's line, were a danger lurking the background. The real Reddit in the room, though, was the dragon. The Westlands had their false prophecies, Cincian had their true ones. In both cases, they agreed that Randall Thor was the dragon. That was a problem in itself, but what it heralded was far worse. The last battle was coming. The boy would need to come and kneel before her for him to win, but that would come. As with all prophecy, it was an inevitability. Then, united, they would defeat the Dark One and leash the Merethdamine afterwards. Until then, Cincian would prepare itself. Her mind went back to the growing reports from the blight of monsters within it. Not that the occasional monster was unusual there, but these were new. Men shaped like beasts, led by black-robed eyeless men who struck fear into soldiers' hearts. Her scholars told her that they matched the mythological stories from the Westlands, but she had her doubts about that. Either way, they were surely another sign that the last battle was coming. Cincian would be ready. While the Westlands failed in its duties to the world, she would prepare, and she would preserve Cincian. Taija had put on her most serious face for her meeting with Alexei and Alusha. She couldn't say she really approved of the way they were carrying on. Not the fact that they were together. Anything that made Alexei happy was fine by her, and Alusha was oddly tolerable for a member of the Red Adger. But she was worried that his judgment was going to be compromised over this. That wasn't a huge issue, though. That was why no single person in the hall was going to be making the decisions on this. The bigger issue was that, when it was presented to the tower, it was going to be a struggle to get them to take it seriously if they knew what the two of them had been up to. So, summarize it for me. Remember, I'm pretty receptive to this. If you can't convince me, then you're certainly not going to convince any of the tower, Aes Sedai. Taija leant back and crossed her arms. They both nodded, and then Alusha looked to Alexei. At least she wasn't dominating things. Taija needed to keep an eye on her. Discreet inquiries had told her Alusha was about 3 times Alexei's age. She seemed to be good for him, and he could certainly look after himself better than the vast majority of men or women in their 20s, but still. That was a big gap in experience. Alexei took a breath and began. So, we've gone into this in some depth, but I'll summarize first. What we're imagining is a joint command between the Hall and the Tower, so an organization within the Hall to match the Red Adger. Then they can send out teams of both Tower and Hall Aes Sedai as investigators, and where needed, operatives. We're thinking that taking any action would need to be agreed by both Hall and Tower representatives. Taija nodded at that and gestured for him to continue. The focus would be on only the most serious crimes, things that are unarguable and which both the Hall and Tower, along with other channeling organizations, can all agree are serious crimes. So, murder, rape, compulsion. The other area where we think it would be useful would be in preventing channeling warlords from taking over nations and helping rulers when channelers are defying their authority. Taija chewed over that for a second. All right, that sounds reasonable-ish. What does ish mean? Alusha looked confused. Oh, Taija thought for a second. It means somewhat, but not completely. So one concern I have straight away is, does this group just end up propping up bad rulers against their people? Her mind immediately went to people like the High Lords of Tyr, at least before Rand. If someone from the Hall had gone there and fomented rebellion, she'd have been quietly cheering them on, politics aside. Egwene was feeling hot, sticky, and miserable. Yeah, to her irritation, seemed to be absolutely fine with the conditions in this wet, hot forest. Frankly, anyone living here would have to be mad to enjoy it. Then she smiled slightly. The ale in general and Yer in particular were all a bit mad. Shade of my heart, I have found them. Her smile widened as Yer seemed to appear from nowhere. He'd deliberately been making noise as he came, so she'd heard him before she saw him. He wasn't given to effusive gestures, but the little ones were all she needed. All right then, let's go speak to them. We need to make sure they see us coming, though. I don't want to scare them. Of course, but if they wish to dance. Egwene's expression didn't change. Then we'll be ready. A couple of minutes later, they emerged from the forest into a clearing. Egwene was slightly behind Yer. She might be the better channeler, but he was obviously the more experienced fighter. Two men and a woman were picking fruit from some kind of bush and looked up in shock as they emerged. The locals were dressed strangely. They wore little, which made Egwene want to blush, not that she allowed herself to. However, what they did wear seemed to be a mixture of leather and straw or some other plant. All three wore what seemed to be skirts of straw or grass, and then a roughly made leather vest on their top. "Hello, friends." Egwene felt stupid saying that, but felt she had little choice. "We are looking for the nearest town or village. Can you help us?" The locals looked at each other in confusion, and then one of the men bent down to pick something off the ground beside him, a spear Egwene realized as he lifted it. She sensed Yer tense beside her and quickly laid a hand on his arm. It was probably fine. He understood diplomacy, obviously, but it didn't hurt to remind him. "We mean you no harm." Egwene opened her hands and held them palm out in front of her. "My name is Egwene, and this is Yer." At the same time, she prepared a couple more webs, just in case. The man with the spear hefted it and barked something back at them, a mishmash of harsh sounds that meant nothing to her. "I'm sorry, I don't understand you. Do you not speak the common tongue?" Did these people really not understand it? She thought everyone spoke it. That was why it was called the common tongue. The man with the spear shouted something again, and the other two turned and ran. Egwene suppressed a wince. This was not going well. Yer was scanning the greenery around them, clearly worried about an ambush. If they didn't speak the common tongue, perhaps. "We mean you no harm. We're looking for village or town." "Do you have a leader? Mayor, general, boss? We want to talk." Egwene suddenly wished she put more work into learning the old tongue. While she could hold a conversation in it, she didn't speak it as well as Elaine or even Alexei. Still better than Nynaeve, though. That certainly got a reaction. The man's jaw dropped and the tip of his spear lowered. Then he seemed to gather himself, his eyes narrowing, before replying in halting, appallingly accented words. "You peril," he spat at the second word. Egwene shook her head. She had no idea what that was. "No," the man's eyes narrowed further. "Okay, come. Leader, I take. No harm." Once Egwene had worked that out, helped by the man gesturing with his spear, she looked at Yer. "I think we should go. I'm not sure how safe it is, but it's what we wanted after all. We know nothing of these people. They may be honorless, but I agree. We must complete our mission. We shall be ready for any treachery." He said the last not as a warning, but as a declaration of fact. It didn't take much more than half an hour of walking for Egwene and Yer to reach the rest of the man's group, or perhaps she could call it a tribe. She wasn't sure. It was all deeply alien to her. They were in an encampment on a hillside in another, larger clearing. There couldn't have been many more than 100 of them, men, women, and children. Many of them were armed with crude weapons of wood and stone. The children ran around naked, while the adults were dressed like the ones she'd seen earlier. Most of them looked smaller than she might have expected and hungry too. Something in their eyes told her that they'd seen much hardship. As she and Yer were led through the village, they were subjected to curious looks from the children, who stopped their play to stare, and hostile glares from the adults. It wasn't a comfortable experience at all, walking under those gazes. Then, with a jolt of surprise, Egwene leant closer to Yer and muttered, "The taller woman on the left can channel." At least she wasn't very strong. Yer didn't change his pace or expression, but she felt the tension in him grow. At the far end of the camp, there was a small raised mound with a wooden chair on it. and on that chair was sat an older woman, shoulder-length grey hair lining her wrinkled face and feathers decorating her simple clothing. Their escort bowed to her and said something in their incomprehensible tongue. After the first woman, it was less of a surprise to Egwene that this one could channel too. She was clearly a leader of some kind, sitting on her ramshackle throne. She still gave Yer another nudge, though. Egwene felt rather than saw the rest of the tribe closing in behind them. She didn't want to leave the initiative on their side, so she bowed low, speaking in the old tongue as well as she could. I greet you. My name is Egwene Ulver, and this is Yer of the Salt Flat Sept of the Nakai dedicated. Better not to mention Aes Sedai straight away. We come from far away and search the leaders of this land. The old woman gave her a long look before speaking in slow, barely comprehensible old tongue. You speak common tongue. Gisab say you not peril, yet you speak like. Where from? It took Egwene a second to remember that the old tongue called itself the common tongue. It was ridiculous, but when she tried to explain how silly that was to Taija, Taija had told her that she thought it was stupid that Egwene's people called their language the common tongue. The woman could be ridiculous at times. I am from Andor and Yer is from the dedicated clans. They are far away to the north, across the ocean. This was at least a far less hostile reception than she'd feared based on the stories. Still, she was glad that she'd concealed the fact that she was holding Sedar or could channel at all. This could still turn bad. Across what is ocean? Like a sea but bigger. That got no reaction from the woman. Big water many kilometers across. The woman frowned at that but nodded to herself. What want from people of Red Rock tribe? I am leader, say me. Egwene was quite sure that they wanted nothing from these people, except possibly to help them. They seemed to be in worse conditions than the meanest of Tern peasants. Nevertheless, it wouldn't do to be rude, and she might have misunderstood their resources. The last battle is coming. The shadow threatens the whole world. We have been sent to search for allies because if the shadow wins, there will be no peace. Shadow, like no sun. Did the woman not understand? The shadow, the dark one. The last battle is coming and his hordes of shadow spawn will sweep over the world, killing everyone they find. There will be no peace, no safety for anyone. Oh, you have fight, want help. Close enough, Egwene nodded. Yes, that's right, the tribal chief smiled. Understand, Red Rock tribe peaceful, we no want fight, you leave. She gestured away from herself, back towards the forest. Yeah, looked like he wanted to protest, but Egwene had no intention of staying around these people. It was clear they wouldn't be much help, and the last thing she wanted was to fight them. Thank you for listening to us. She gave the woman another bow. I must ask, though, do you know of anyone who could help us? The woman's eyes narrowed, but after a moment she replied, Yes, I know tribe, very dangerous. They have peril may help, but not like strangers, maybe kill you. That didn't sound appealing, but they had a mission and Egwene was confident that between the two of her and Yer, there were few things short of the Forsaken that could truly endanger them. Can you tell us how to reach them? We can pay. The chief's eye landed on Egwene's belt knife, and she pointed at it. That, great gift, will take you for that. Egwene made sure not to show her surprise. It was just a simple belt knife, but that made it an easy bargain. Thinking about it, she was not sure she had seen any metal among these people. Perhaps that was why the chief looked so avariciously at her knife.